Imagine lying in bed at the end of a long day, not just tired, but restless. Your thoughts are racing, your worries spinning, and no matter how much you toss and turn, sleep just won't come. But what if, instead of counting sheep or scrolling your phone, you could fall asleep while learning something that actually brings you peace? Something that helps you feel calm, strong, and clear, not just tonight, but every night. Now, picture this. You're about to drift off while traveling through time, a journey through thousands of years of ancient wisdom, powerful ideas, and life-changing lessons. This isn't just history. This is the mindset of warriors, emperors, and everyday people who learned how to face life without fear, who trained their minds to stay calm no matter what. But let me ask you honestly, how often do you go to bed feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or stuck in your own head? Most of us do. That's why tonight's video is different. It's not just for sleep, it's for transformation. Because the way you end your day shapes the way you begin the next. If your night ends with clarity and purpose, your morning begins with power. In this video, you'll discover the entire story of Stoicism, explained simply, gently, and in a way that helps you not just understand it, but feel it. You'll learn from philosophers like Zeno, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, not through boring facts, but through calming stories that guide your thoughts and help your mind relax. So, get ready. Turn off the noise, dim the lights, and let your thoughts settle. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a bedtime story. It's a new way of thinking, a new way of being. And when you wake up tomorrow, don't be surprised if you feel stronger, calmer, and more in control than ever before. Let's begin. Now, take a deep breath and let your thoughts settle. Most stories from ancient philosophy begin the same way. Names, titles, writings, schools. But what happens when the people who lived the philosophy left no writings? When their names were buried under centuries of silence? These voices existed. They shaped generations. They lived by the same values, discipline, courage, wisdom, but weren't given the space to speak. Their presence was strong, even if their words were never recorded. And in that silence, something powerful still remains, waiting to be heard. In the early years of Stoicism, when philosophers walked in cloaks and debated under columns, Roman women were rarely part of the scene. Not because they couldn't think or feel deeply, but because the world wasn't built to listen to them. Stoic ideas traveled fast in places like the Agora and the Forum. Men wrote them down. They debated, refined, and published. But at home, far from the noise of public life, there were women who carried these same ideas with quiet strength. They didn't need stages or scrolls. Their daily lives became their philosophy. Portia Catonis is one of the few whose name remains. She was the daughter of Cato the Younger, one of the most famously strict and principled Stoics of his time. Raised in a house where character came before comfort, she learned early what it meant to stand still while others panicked, to hold fast to virtue while others compromised. But Portia wasn't only her father's daughter. She became something more, a symbol of silent strength, a reminder that pain can be faced with calm, and that loyalty doesn't have to shout to be powerful. Her life was hard. She lived through civil war. Her husband, Brutus, was deeply involved in the political struggle against Julius Caesar. These were dangerous times, and yet Portia didn't shrink from them. When she felt her husband was hiding something from her, she didn't beg or threaten. She wounded herself in the leg to prove that she could endure pain and deserved to be trusted. That act, more than any speech, told the world what she believed. Virtue is more than talk. It's action. We don't have her writings. We don't know her thoughts in her own words, but her choices speak clearly. She lived a Stoic life without needing to name it, and she wasn't alone. Across Roman society, women were expected to stay in the background. They were told to manage households, raise children, and stay quiet during serious conversations. But inside those homes, philosophy was being lived. Women learned through watching, listening, and doing. They may not have sat in the Stoic schools, but they practiced self-control while caring for the sick. They showed courage when their sons left for war. They accepted loss without complaint, carried burdens without asking for praise, and guided their families with discipline and patience. The absence of their names doesn't mean they lacked wisdom. It means history didn't ask them to speak, and yet they found ways to live deeply, to endure with grace, to pass on values not through writing, but through presence. Roman culture didn't encourage women to become philosophers, but that didn't stop them from living philosophical lives. They listened when husbands or sons spoke about virtue and fate. They paid attention. And they didn't just listen, they applied those teachings in the most personal, difficult parts of life. When a child died, when food was scarce, when war broke out, they kept going. They practiced what the Stoics preached. Focus on what you can control, let go of what you can't. This quiet wisdom was powerful because it was tested daily. The kitchen, the garden, the nursery. These were not classrooms, but they taught resilience. The mother who stays calm during illness, the wife who keeps order during chaos, the sister who shows kindness during grief. All of them lived Stoicism more deeply than many who spoke about it. And what about friendship? In a world where women were often isolated, female friendships became support systems. It's possible that groups of Stoic-minded women shared thoughts, comfort, and encouragement in private. We don't have their conversations, but the strength of these relationships speaks volumes. Wisdom grows in connection, and even if the world didn't recognize their efforts, these women built quiet networks of virtue. There's also something deeply Stoic about accepting invisibility, about living well even when no one notices. These women weren't chasing praise. They didn't have the luxury of public success. And yet they chose calm over panic, reason over reaction, peace over bitterness. That's power. It's easy to think that only public voices shape the world. But every strong generation is raised by people behind the scenes. The Stoic woman, with no name in the books, may have shaped more minds through her children than any philosopher with a podium. They taught by example. They showed what it meant to stay calm when things went wrong. They didn't preach about fate. They accepted it. They didn't write about discipline. They lived it. And in doing so, they carried the spirit of Stoicism into places philosophy books never reached. Their strength wasn't dramatic, it was steady. The woman who stays by her husband's side when he's imprisoned. The daughter who remains loyal when her family is torn apart. The friend who helps another grieve without giving in to despair. These aren't rare moments. They were daily life. And they required as much courage and clarity as any battlefield or Senate floor. Even in silence, these women were shaping their world. They were showing that philosophy doesn't need to be loud to be real. It doesn't need an audience to have meaning. It just needs to be lived. We can also learn something deeper from this silence. Sometimes history leaves out the most meaningful stories. But when we look closer, we find strength in the spaces between the lines. We realize that wisdom isn't always recorded, it's remembered, and presence especially a calm, steady presence, often leaves the deepest mark. In our time, it's tempting to think that what matters is what gets shared, liked, or recognized. But the Stoic women of Rome remind us, true virtue doesn't need applause. It needs practice. And often, the most powerful acts of character are never seen by crowds. This perspective also changes how we think about leadership. We often imagine leaders as those in charge, those who speak the loudest. But leadership can also mean guiding without words, shaping without force, teaching through daily discipline. The Stoic woman was, in many ways, the strongest kind of leader. She didn't just lead others, she led herself. We can't go back and find their names, but we can honor them by remembering that power takes many forms, that presence matters, that a steady life lived well is as meaningful as any book. And maybe that's what Stoicism was always pointing to, not fame, not success, but inner strength. These women lived that truth fully, even when no one wrote it down. So tonight, as you fall asleep, let yourself feel the weight of those quiet lives. Let them remind you that wisdom is not about speaking the most, it's about living the best. Let their strength be your comfort, their clarity your calm, and their silence your lesson. Because even when no one was listening, they kept living with purpose. And that, more than anything, is what Stoicism is all about. But the story of quiet strength doesn't end with those who were forgotten. Sometimes history loses not just people, but entire ideas, visions that could have changed everything if only they had been allowed to grow. While Stoic women lived philosophy through silence and daily endurance, there was another path Stoicism almost took, one that could have rewritten how society itself was built. It came from the mind of the very man who founded the school, Zeno of Citium. And though most of it has been lost to time, what remains is enough to spark deep curiosity. Zeno didn't just start a philosophy, he offered a blueprint for a different kind of world. Long before his ideas were trimmed down into personal advice and daily disciplines, he dreamed bigger. His first known work, simply titled The Republic, wasn't about how one person should live. It was about how everyone could live together in harmony. But unlike Plato's famous version, Zeno's Republic wasn't built on hierarchy or noble lies. It was built on radical equality, shared purpose, and the idea that true law comes from nature, not power. At its core, Zeno's vision rejected the way society was organized. He questioned the systems people took for granted: family, property, nationality. He stripped them all away in order to reveal something deeper. A universal human community governed not by kings or soldiers, but by wisdom and virtue. He saw the idea of dividing people by city-states or bloodlines as artificial. Why should someone born in Athens be more important than someone born elsewhere? Why should land or wealth define who gets heard? In Zeno's eyes, the only thing that should matter was a person's character. The citizens of Zeno's ideal society wouldn't own private property. Instead, everything would be shared, not through forced redistribution, but through a shift in values. If people stopped chasing possessions, they wouldn't need to compete or steal or hoard. There would be no need for locked doors if everyone respected each other. This was not about poverty. It was about freeing people from attachment to things that divide. When no one owns more than another, the reasons for jealousy, resentment, and fear disappear. What remains is mutual respect. And this vision extended to relationships too. Zeno broke away from traditional Roman views on marriage and gender roles. He proposed a community where love and partnership were based on mutual virtue, not legal contracts or family alliances. Instead of forming exclusive, possessive bonds, people would be united by shared understanding. It wasn't about everyone loving everyone in chaos. It was about building trust on ethical grounds rather than control or custom. In doing so, he challenged the belief that personal relationships needed to be regulated by the state or tradition. Perhaps the most radical part of Zeno's blueprint was the idea that all human beings are equal. No matter their origin, their class, or their gender, every person had the potential for wisdom. This was unheard of at the time. In a world where slaves were treated as property and women were often dismissed as irrational, Zeno's view placed all people on the same moral plane. The philosopher and the servant, the soldier and the child, all were capable of virtue. All deserved respect, not based on status, but on their choices. His republic had no need for judges because its people would be taught how to live rightly. There would be no punishments because no one would be raised to harm others. The state itself would be less a government and more a community bound by shared principles. Instead of policing behavior with fear, the society would raise its citizens to act from understanding. Zeno believed that when people are raised to follow reason, they don't need force to do what is right. Some of these ideas may sound impossible, but Zeno didn't write them as fantasy. He believed they were the logical outcome of Stoic ethics. If the highest good is living in accordance with nature, and nature is rational, then a rational society should reflect that order. Division, greed, violence, these weren't natural. They were the result of losing sight of what truly matters. Zeno's republic was an attempt to strip away the layers of custom and tradition that had hardened into cruelty. What's heartbreaking is how little of this vision survives today. Most of the republic has been lost. We know about it only through summaries and fragments quoted by later authors. Even other Stoics eventually moved away from these early political ideas. Over time, Stoicism became more focused on personal ethics than on building ideal societies. And while that practical shift helped Stoicism survive for centuries, it also meant losing the bold, collective dream that started it all. Still, even in fragments, Zeno's vision continues to echo. In times of great inequality or division, his ideas come back like a forgotten song. The thought of a world where people are treated equally, where justice doesn't come from punishment, but from understanding. That thought refuses to die. And maybe that's because it touches something deep in us, a longing not just to live well, but to live together in harmony. What can we learn from this lost blueprint today? First, that ideas don't have to survive in full to still guide us. Even a broken map can point in the right direction. Zeno's work reminds us that philosophy isn't just about self-help. It's about imagining what life could be if we all lived by higher values. It's a call to think beyond survival or success and ask, what kind of world would we build if we stopped trying to win and started trying to understand? Second, it shows us the link between personal virtue and social justice. In Zeno's republic, the citizens aren't peaceful because of laws. They're peaceful because they've trained their minds. This means that ethics and politics aren't separate. The way you treat your neighbor isn't just about being nice. It's about building a society that doesn't need walls. If you can learn to share, listen, and forgive in your own life, you're already laying a brick in that forgotten city. And third, it teaches us humility. Zeno didn't pretend he had all the answers. His republic wasn't perfect, but he dared to ask the questions others were afraid of. What if we didn't need money to feel safe? What if love wasn't about ownership? What if leadership meant guiding, not ruling? These questions still matter. They still hurt. Because deep down, we know that our systems often fall short of our values. That's why remembering Zeno's republic isn't just about honoring history. It's about asking ourselves what we've lost by moving away from big dreams. In the noise of daily life, it's easy to settle, to tell ourselves that human nature is too broken for peace or that justice is too complicated to reach. But Zeno didn't accept that. He believed that people could be taught to live better, not just alone, but together. Even in its silence, the Republic gives us permission to think big, to ask what kind of communities we want to build, not just for ourselves, but for others. It challenges the idea that power must always come from control. It dares us to believe that character could be more important than class. That wisdom could be more valuable than wealth. That equality is not just a hope, but a structure we can actually design, if we're brave enough to try. As you rest tonight, let this part of the journey stay with you. Somewhere beneath the ruins of history, a map was drawn to a different world. And even if we never see it in full, the path still exists in the choices we make every day, in how we speak to others, in how we share, in what we believe people are capable of, not just in private, but in the way we live together. The world Zeno dreamed of may be gone from paper, but it doesn't have to be gone from the heart. That blueprint wasn't just political, it was personal. It was a call to live not for status, but for harmony. And maybe, just maybe, the most radical thing you can do in today's world is to believe it's still possible. Ideas that try to reshape society often begin as hopes, but they rarely survive unchanged. Zeno's vision of a just and equal community gave Stoicism a wide collective purpose. But history has its own direction. The world did not shift into utopia. Instead, it moved into conflict, survival, and empire. And in that new environment, Stoicism didn't vanish. It adapted. What began as a peaceful philosophy of shared reason found a second life where it was needed most, on the battlefield. When the world turned harsh, Stoicism turned inward. As wars spread across the Roman Empire and beyond, people no longer looked to philosophy to build ideal cities. They turned to it to survive them. No one showed this better than Marcus Aurelius. As emperor, he led his troops in long campaigns against fierce enemies. But at night, instead of writing orders, he wrote thoughts. In his private journal, later called Meditations, he practiced Stoicism like a soldier polishes his sword, not to display, but to endure. He wasn't writing to sound wise. He was writing not to fall apart. Death was around him. Friends betrayed him. His health was weak. And still, his words repeat one core lesson: stay calm, stay just, stay steady. He reminded himself that everything in life passes, that fear is natural, but so is courage, that the world can break your body, but only you can give it your mind. For soldiers, this mindset is not theory, it's survival. The ancient Roman legions lived in brutal conditions: hunger, disease, sudden violence, all normal. In that world, the Stoic principle of focusing only on what you can control became a shield. A soldier could not control the weather, the orders, or even his lifespan, but he could control his judgment. He could decide not to panic. He could act with honor, even when the world seemed without it. This discipline wasn't cold, it was human. It gave soldiers a way to carry fear without letting fear carry them. When they saw death, they were taught to ask, "Is this something I can prevent?" If not, they turned their attention inward. They took care of their thoughts. They guarded their reactions. This training of the soul became as important as training the body. And Stoicism didn't just teach how to survive war, it shaped how soldiers fought. The idea of justice meant more than following rules. It meant respecting the enemy's humanity. Marcus wrote about not hating opponents. He saw anger as a weakness, not a strength. True power, he said, was being able to face harm without harming your own character. In practice, this meant leaders had to act with restraint, even when revenge seemed justified. Mercy to a Stoic was not softness. It was wisdom in action. Even in Roman times, this moral code stood out. Other philosophies praised glory or victory. Stoicism praised self-restraint. And that distinction mattered. Because when a person sees war as a test of ego, cruelty follows. But when war is a test of virtue, cruelty becomes failure. Stoicism set a higher standard, one where the goal was not domination, but dignity. That same standard echoes through time. In modern military ethics, you find similar principles. Codes of conduct often ask soldiers to separate emotion from decision. They are trained to act with discipline, to follow clear rules, to avoid unnecessary harm. These rules are not just about order, they are about holding on to humanity in the middle of chaos. And many of these values can be traced back to Stoic roots. But Stoicism doesn't stop at the battlefield, it continues after. One of the greatest challenges for any soldier is returning to normal life. Combat changes the brain. The habits built for survival don't always fit in quiet civilian moments. This is where Stoicism becomes more than a theory again, because it speaks to the part of the mind that wants peace, but doesn't know how to find it. Veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress often feel like their emotions are out of control. They relive danger in safe places. They feel guilt for surviving. They feel anger for what they saw. Modern therapy teaches skills to calm these storms, and some of those skills match Stoic exercises almost perfectly. For example, the Stoic practice of separating events from judgments is now used in cognitive behavioral therapy. A veteran is taught to recognize that a loud noise is just a sound, not a threat, that a memory is not a command. Stoicism taught this centuries ago. Epictetus said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our opinions about things." He taught students to pause, reflect, and ask, "Is this in my control?" That single question is now at the center of many healing programs. Even the idea of a moral injury, when a soldier breaks their own code during war, finds answers in Stoicism. The guilt from such moments can be overwhelming. But Stoic thinkers offered a path back. They didn't promise perfection, they promised growth. Marcus wrote that you may fail, but you can always return to your principles, that every day is a chance to begin again. This return to virtue is not about forgetting what happened, it's about facing it with honesty. Stoicism doesn't say to pretend you're fine, it says, feel everything, but don't be ruled by it. Know your pain, but don't become it. And this message, simple but deep, has helped many people rebuild their lives after war. Some modern veterans even say that reading Stoic texts helped them more than anything else. Because these texts speak with clarity, they don't avoid darkness. They look right into it and say, you are still capable of good. You are not your worst moment. You can still live with purpose. This kind of healing doesn't erase trauma, but it gives trauma a place. It says, this happened, it hurt, and still I can choose how I respond. That shift in thinking from victim to actor is powerful. It doesn't change the past, but it changes the future. In this way, Stoicism offers a kind of quiet courage, not the kind you see in movies, the kind that shows up in therapy rooms, in sleepless nights, in small choices to keep going. It teaches that bravery isn't about never breaking. It's about putting the pieces back with care. It also teaches community. Stoic texts often speak of the whole world as a single city, that we are all citizens of one shared space. In war, this idea becomes real. A soldier must see beyond borders, beyond uniforms, to remember that their opponent is also human, that compassion is possible even in conflict. And when war ends, this idea helps with reconnection. Veterans can feel like outsiders, like no one understands. But Stoicism reminds them that they are not alone, that suffering connects people, that wisdom is born in struggle, and that their story has value, not just for them, but for others. So the philosophy that once helped emperors lead armies now helps people come home. The tools haven't changed, just the context. A breathing technique, a daily reflection, a short phrase to repeat during stress. These are the same tools used by Roman soldiers and modern therapists alike. This is why Stoicism remains relevant, because it meets people where they are, whether on a battlefield, in a hospital, or alone with their thoughts. It speaks plainly. It offers guidance without judgment. And it reminds us that no matter how hard life becomes, the mind can still find strength. As we move through this journey, it becomes clear that Stoicism is not just a set of ideas. It is a way of standing in the world, with feet planted, with eyes open, with heart steady. It has shaped generals and guided those who carried heavy burdens. And it continues to be a quiet companion for anyone facing a storm. Tonight, as the noise fades and your breath slows, let this lesson settle within you. Not all battles are visible, not all warriors wear armor, but in every person who chooses discipline over chaos, courage over fear, and calm over rage, Stoicism lives on, and its strength, gentle but unbreakable, remains, even in silence. Even the strongest body returns home from battle with a burden the eye cannot see. The fight doesn't end when the war is over. The weight carried by those who endure trauma, loss, or even daily stress cannot be lifted with medals or silence. This is where strength must shift from the body to the mind, where survival is no longer about endurance, but about understanding. And at this turning point, we meet a voice from the past, whose words still echo in therapy rooms today, Epictetus. He had no military rank, no wealth. He was once a slave, walking with a limp from an injury that may have been punishment. But Epictetus became one of the most important philosophers in Stoic history, not because of what he owned, but because of what he taught. And now, over 2,000 years later, those teachings form the base of something many people rely on in silence: cognitive behavioral therapy. The link between ancient philosophy and modern psychology isn't just interesting, it's transformational. Because when you trace CBT back to its roots, you discover a truth many people still overlook. Your thoughts are not your fate. You can challenge them. you can change them. And in that change, you can change how you feel, how you act, and how you live. CBT is built on a simple idea. Events don't cause feelings. Your interpretation of events does. You lose your job. One person might feel relief, another despair. The event is the same, but the thought makes the difference. This is not just theory. It's exactly what Epictetus taught. It is not things themselves that disturb us, he said, but our opinions about them. That one sentence could be found word for word in a therapist's office today. And it's not just an insight, it's a tool. When you begin to separate events from your judgments, you gain power. You start to see the gap between what happens and how you react. And in that space, change begins. CBT therapists guide people through this space. They help patients recognize distorted thoughts, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, overgeneralizing. These patterns cause unnecessary suffering, and Stoicism addressed them centuries ago. Epictetus didn't use the word cognitive distortion, but he knew the danger of unchecked thought. He told his students to examine their beliefs, to ask whether their responses were based on reason or habit. This practice is called cognitive restructuring in therapy. In Stoicism, it was called training the faculty of judgment. Both mean learning to look at a thought and ask, is this true? Is it useful? What else could I believe instead? Not because you want to lie to yourself, but because your brain isn't always telling the truth, especially under stress. Epictetus warned against reacting like an animal to every emotion. He taught that humans have the unique power to reflect, to pause, to choose. That power is the very heart of modern CBT. A therapist might say, you are not your thoughts. You can step back and look at them. Epictetus would agree. He said the mind can be trained like the body. That discipline in thought is the key to freedom. This doesn't mean ignoring feelings. It means understanding them. CBT teaches emotional regulation, not by suppressing emotion, but by understanding what fuels it. If a person feels worthless, the therapist doesn't dismiss that pain. Instead, they explore the thoughts behind it. What makes you believe you have no value? Where did that belief come from? Is there evidence against it? Slowly, thought by thought, the emotion begins to shift. Stoicism used this same structure. Epictetus told his students to write down their impressions, test them against reason, and replace them with more rational views. He called this process keeping watch over the ruling faculty. Today we might call it journaling, cognitive tracking, or mindfulness. The name doesn't matter, the result does. And this is not just helpful for people in crisis. Everyone has mental habits. Some are helpful. Others build anxiety, insecurity, or guilt. When you learn to question them, you don't become less human. You become more aware, more grounded. Stoicism and CBT both believe that the goal is not to feel nothing, but to feel clearly. This clarity comes from practice. CBT uses worksheets. Stoics used reflection. CBT encourages thought logs. Stoics used evening reviews. At the end of each day, Epictetus recommended asking yourself, what did I do well? What did I fail at? What can I do better tomorrow? This is not punishment, it's growth. And when setbacks come, both systems teach the same thing. Don't judge yourself for the feeling. Recognize it, then return to your values. CBT calls this value-based living. Stoicism calls it living in accordance with nature. Either way, it means choosing to act from principle, not emotion. To be guided by what you believe is right, not by what fear or anger demands. One powerful example of this can be found in people recovering from anxiety disorders. Anxiety often arises from fear of the unknown or fear of losing control. CBT doesn't try to remove uncertainty. It helps people tolerate it, to say, I don't know what will happen, but I know how I will respond. This is Stoicism exactly. Epictetus said, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Even exposure therapy, where patients face their fears gradually, is mirrored in Stoic thought. Epictetus believed in practicing discomfort, not avoiding it. He told his students to expose themselves to small challenges so that they would be ready for larger ones, to delay gratification, to walk in the cold, not as punishment, but as training. This is resilience, step by step. And this is why the link between Stoicism and CBT matters so much. It shows us that mental health is not new, that long before psychology had a name, people were struggling with the same fears, doubts, and thoughts. And someone, limping, enslaved, laughed at by others, stood up and said, "You are not powerless. You can think differently. You can live better." That message still resonates, and it offers a bridge. For people who are skeptical of therapy, Stoicism provides a familiar structure. For people who feel lost in self-help, CBT offers a roadmap. And for those who walk between both, the connection brings clarity. There are, of course, differences. Stoicism is a moral system. CBT is a treatment method. Stoicism cares about virtue. CBT focuses on function, but they don't contradict each other. They complete each other. Stoicism says, live with wisdom. CBT says, let's find the patterns stopping you. Together they guide both the why and the how. Many therapists now use Stoic quotes in sessions, not as decoration, but as tools. Because when someone says, nothing is good or bad except thinking makes it so, they aren't dismissing your pain. They're inviting you to see that you have more power than you believe. And that's what this connection ultimately offers. Power, not over others, but over yourself, over your fears, your habits, your self-criticism. It doesn't promise happiness, it promises clarity. Peace, not through control, but through understanding. As you rest tonight, let this idea take root. The thoughts that disturb you are not permanent. They are not facts. They are habits. And habits can change, thought by thought, choice by choice. You are not broken. You are learning. And every step toward clarity is a step toward strength. Epictetus said that no one is free unless they master themselves. And CBT helps us begin that mastery, not through force, but through awareness. Not by pushing pain away, but by sitting beside it and asking, what are you trying to tell me? That question may be quiet, but it changes everything. Understanding the power of thought and reclaiming control over your inner life is one thing when you're free, when you're educated, when you're safe. But what happens when your body belongs to someone else? When your choices are limited not by your beliefs, but by chains, commands, and the cruel rhythms of slavery? This is where Stoicism was tested at its deepest level and passed. Because one of its strongest voices came not from a palace or a lecture hall, but from bondage. Epictetus, the philosopher who taught strength of mind, lived most of his early life without freedom of movement, without protection, and without rights. He was born into slavery in the Roman Empire, under conditions designed to strip a person of dignity. His name itself reflects this reality. It wasn't even his real name. Epiktetos in Greek means acquired or purchased. It was a label, not an identity. And yet, from this life, which most would associate with helplessness, came a philosophy rooted in personal power and clarity. That paradox is not just inspiring, it's essential to understanding how deeply Stoicism can be lived, even under the worst conditions. Many people discuss Stoicism from a comfortable place, but Epictetus lived it while being owned by another human. He could not control where he went, what he ate, or even if he lived. But what he discovered, and what he later taught others, is that there is one part of the human experience that cannot be enslaved: the mind. He began with the only space he had control over: his thoughts, his judgments, his choices. And from there, he built something unshakable. This wasn't just theory for him, it was survival. He didn't need books to tell him that external events are beyond our control. His daily life showed it clearly. He couldn't change his owner's commands, he couldn't alter his status, but he realized he still had one form of freedom that no one could touch: how he chose to interpret those experiences. That realization became the core of his teachings and the secret to his strength. Epictetus's master was said to be cruel. There are stories that he injured Epictetus's leg, possibly even broke it, leaving him with a lifelong limp. And yet Epictetus is reported to have said calmly, "If you continue, you will break it." And when it broke, he said, "Did I not tell you?" This is not indifference. This is clarity in the face of cruelty. By refusing to react with rage or despair, Epictetus showed that even pain could be met with reason. The true power of his story isn't that he became a philosopher after slavery. It's that his insights came through slavery, that his condition sharpened his thinking. He didn't escape suffering before finding peace. He found peace while still suffering. That's why his philosophy resonates so deeply. It's not idealistic, it's forged in hardship. Epictetus taught that the first lesson in life is knowing what belongs to us and what does not. He spoke of prohairesis, the faculty of choice. Everything outside of that, he said, is not truly ours. You can lose your possessions, your health, your social position, but your ability to choose your response remains. For him, this wasn't abstract. His entire life proved it. His body was owned. His name was not his own, but his dignity, his reasoning, his inner strength, those were never for sale. Later, when he was freed and began teaching in Nicopolis, he didn't create a school filled with luxury. He lived simply, avoided fame, and taught young men who often came from powerful families. What they found in him wasn't grand speech. It was an unshakable calm. He showed them that freedom isn't a legal status, it's a mental condition. You can wear chains and still be free. You can sit on a throne and still be a slave to fear, desire, or opinion. His background gave his philosophy something rare: credibility. When Epictetus told someone not to worry about wealth, he wasn't speaking from comfort. When he said that people insult you only if you let their words define you, he was speaking as someone who had been humiliated and ignored for most of his life. His authority didn't come from position, it came from consistency. He lived every idea he taught. This is also why his influence lasted. He never wrote a book himself. His student Arrian recorded his lessons, much like a historian would record a general's campaign. But what Arrian preserved wasn't just content, it was character. He described a man who was light-hearted, strong, and direct, who faced life's worst trials with humor and insight, who didn't pretend to be above emotion but refused to be ruled by it. In his discourses, Epictetus focused on what makes a good life. He didn't speak about theory without practice. His lessons often began with small, ordinary issues: what to do when someone mocks you, how to handle anger, how to stay humble when praised. But beneath each lesson was something deeper: the belief that no one can steal your peace unless you hand it over. This belief challenges us today as much as it did then. In a world filled with distractions, opinions, and pressures, the idea that you can still govern your own mind is both ancient and modern. And the fact that it came from a man who had every reason to feel powerless only makes it more valuable. It also reframes how we think about hardship. Most of us try to avoid pain. We want safety before we seek wisdom. But Epictetus shows that sometimes wisdom grows best in hard soil. That suffering, when faced with honesty and clarity, can lead to insight. Not because pain is noble, but because what you do with pain reveals who you are. His legacy reaches far beyond his time. Generals, presidents, and writers have studied his words, but perhaps his most important message isn't for the powerful, it's for the overlooked, for anyone who feels stuck, ignored, or held down by life. Epictetus's life says, "You are more than your circumstances. You are more than what others see. Your choices, small, daily, quiet, are the key to your freedom." He didn't believe in escaping reality. He believed in meeting it with courage. He didn't ask people to pretend they weren't suffering. He asked them to hold on to their values, even when life felt unjust. He didn't tell people to feel nothing. He told them to feel deeply and choose wisely. His example also teaches humility. Because it's easy to think that wisdom must come from privilege. That philosophy belongs to those who have time, education, and ease. But Epictetus turned that idea upside down. He proved that deep understanding can come from struggle, that truth can come from silence, that power can come from the most unlikely places. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all, because we all have things we can't change: loss, injury, injustice, rejection. But we also have something we can always shape: our response. Epictetus didn't ask for his situation, but he used it. And in doing so, he gave generations a map for freedom, not the kind stamped by governments, but the kind found in the heart. So as you drift into rest, let that truth stay with you. Even when the world feels against you, your mind remains your own. Even when your name is taken, your reason stays. And even when everything is stripped away, the choice to live with dignity, to rise with thought, not reaction, is still yours. This is what Epictetus lived. This is what he left behind. Not a book, but a way of being that can never be enslaved. The strength of the soul revealed in Epictetus was a living testimony that philosophy can be more than words. It can be a shield against the deepest suffering. But that strength alone would not have survived across generations without a structure behind it, a system to hold the weight of ideas. While Epictetus embodied the heart of Stoicism, someone else built its bones. His name was Chrysippus, and without him, Stoicism would have been little more than a noble instinct without foundation. Chrysippus was not known for dramatic stories or political power. He didn't win wars or lead revolts. He was a scholar, quiet, tireless, and endlessly precise. But what he accomplished shaped the direction of philosophy in a way that still influences how people think today. He didn't just add to Stoicism, he rebuilt it. When the school was on the brink of collapse after the death of Cleanthes, Chrysippus took over and turned it into a solid, comprehensive system. His work created the intellectual engine that kept Stoicism alive and relevant long after his own time. He wrote more than 700 books. Most of them are lost, but enough fragments remain to show how far he pushed the limits of logic, ethics, and physics. He didn't separate these topics the way modern thinkers often do. For him, logic wasn't just a mental exercise, it was a way to live better. Clear thinking led to better judgment, and better judgment led to a more virtuous life. Confusion, on the other hand, was a kind of sickness. To think poorly was to live poorly. So Chrysippus treated logic like medicine for the mind. At the core of his method was propositional logic, a system not based on objects or categories like Aristotle's syllogisms, but on full statements. Instead of saying all men are mortal, Chrysippus asked what happens when you say, if it is day, then it is light. This approach laid the groundwork for understanding conditionals, contradictions, and inference. These are not just philosophical puzzles. They are the foundation of how modern systems, computers, legal arguments, even artificial intelligence work. He created structures for understanding how ideas connect, how one leads to another, and how truth can be preserved through argument. His work turned language into something that could be tested, shaped, and refined. This might sound abstract, but it had practical purpose. For Chrysippus, if your reasoning was wrong, your emotions would follow, and if your emotions went unchecked, your life would spiral into confusion. So mastering logic was like building a lighthouse in the fog. He also believed that logic could protect people from manipulation. In a world filled with persuasive rhetoric, it was easy to be misled by clever speakers. Chrysippus wanted people to spot faulty reasoning the same way a sailor spots a storm. He taught how to break down arguments, how to test assumptions, and how to detect hidden contradictions. This helped Stoics become not just wise, but sharp. They didn't argue to win, they argued to find truth. What made Chrysippus unique was not just that he taught these things, but that he lived by them. He believed that truth was not something to own, but something to uncover. He didn't fear being wrong. In fact, he encouraged debate because it forced better thinking. His method wasn't about memorizing rules. It was about sharpening the mind through constant questioning. He also linked logic directly to the idea of fate. In Stoic thought, the universe runs on reason. Everything happens according to a chain of causes. To understand those causes, you need to understand how events are connected. Chrysippus used logic to map this chain, showing that even complex outcomes could be traced back to clear origins. This gave people a way to accept events without losing their sense of order. Even suffering had a place, not because it was good, but because it was explainable. In this system, free will wasn't about breaking the chain of cause. It was about how you responded within it. Chrysippus argued that while external events are determined, the mind's ascent is not forced. You receive impressions, but you choose whether to accept or reject them. Logic trains this choice. It helps you know whether your impression is trustworthy. Without this filter, you risk being ruled by impulse or deception. Chrysippus also cared deeply about language. He studied how words shape thought and how misuse of words leads to confusion. He knew that people often suffer not because of what happens, but because of how they interpret what happens. If your words are imprecise, your emotions become tangled. So he worked on definitions, categories, and clarity, not to win arguments, but to help people speak and think in ways that aligned with reality. This focus on precision is what separates casual wisdom from durable philosophy. A single wise phrase can feel powerful, but without structure, it can collapse under pressure. Chrysippus didn't want Stoicism to rely on inspiration. He wanted it to withstand doubt, challenge, and change. His logic was not cold, it was protective. It offered tools for when emotions run high, when relationships break down, or when grief strikes unexpectedly. He understood that the mind, like the body, needs training. Just as you wouldn't trust your strength without practice, you shouldn't trust your thoughts without examination. He taught that everyone should test their beliefs the way a blacksmith tests metal, with heat, pressure, and repeated shaping. Only then can you trust your reasoning in times of crisis. His work influenced not just Stoics, but other schools as well. Later philosophers, including early Christians and Enlightenment thinkers, studied his logic. Though many didn't credit him directly, the fingerprints of his thought can be found in legal reasoning, scientific method, and even computer programming. Every time a debate hinges on clarity, every time a claim is tested through structured reasoning, Chrysippus's legacy lives on. In modern times, his work provides an antidote to mental noise. In an age of information overload, quick opinions, and emotional reaction, Chrysippus offers discipline. He reminds us that not every thought deserves belief, that not every argument is worth engaging, that mental strength means knowing the difference between sound logic and seductive rhetoric. He also reminds us that truth matters, not just as a moral value, but as a practical one. When your beliefs align with reality, you suffer less, you act more wisely, you feel less regret. Logic, then, is not just for scholars, it's for anyone who wants peace of mind. Chrysippus believed that peace begins in clarity, and clarity begins in logic. He showed that philosophy is not about lofty talk, it's about building tools. Tools that can help a person face fear without panic, make decisions without confusion, and speak without misleading others. His vision made Stoicism not just a code of ethics, but a full system of understanding, a way to navigate not just feelings, but facts. Tonight, as your thoughts begin to quiet, know that the structure of your reasoning matters. The way your mind connects ideas shapes how you live. And behind that quiet order, behind every clear decision and every calm response, there stands someone who gave us the tools to think with strength, not loudly, not proudly, but precisely. And through that precision, we find a new kind of peace, the kind that no chaos can shake. A clear mind, built through logic, does more than help a person think straight. It becomes a lens through which the entire world is understood. Chrysippus gave Stoicism its logical backbone, but that foundation reached beyond philosophy. His influence, and that of Stoicism itself, seeped into unexpected places. One of the most important of those places was a rising movement built not on reason alone, but on faith, suffering, and salvation. At the heart of early Christianity, there are echoes, soft but undeniable, of Stoic thought. The world of the first Christians was the same world where Stoic teachers walked, taught, and wrote. Roman cities were filled with ideas competing for attention. Temples stood beside bathhouses, scrolls were copied beside scriptures, and the conversations of merchants, philosophers, and prophets all mixed together. Stoicism, with its clarity and emphasis on virtue, was one of the dominant voices, and when Christianity began to grow, it did not emerge in isolation. It developed in dialogue with culture, with empire, and with philosophies like Stoicism. Both Stoicism and early Christianity offered guidance on how to live. Both stressed the importance of inner transformation, moral discipline, and a life dedicated to higher values. Both were deeply concerned with how to face pain, loss, and injustice without losing integrity. For these reasons, early Christian thinkers didn't reject Stoicism outright. They borrowed from it. They adapted some of its teachings, and, in time, they also pushed firmly away from parts that didn't align with their growing theology. In the New Testament, there are passages that feel like they could have been spoken by a Stoic. When the Apostle Paul writes about being content in all circumstances, about training the self, or about the body as a temporary vessel, the language and ideas feel familiar to readers of Seneca or Epictetus. Paul himself was educated in a multicultural world. He was capable of speaking to both Jews and Greeks, and he often adapted his words to fit his audience's background. In Acts 17, for example, Paul addresses philosophers in Athens and directly quotes Stoic poets. This wasn't accidental, it was strategic. He spoke in terms they would understand, using Stoic-style language to convey a new message. But the overlap wasn't just rhetorical. There were shared ideas, especially about endurance, detachment, and universal humanity. The Stoics believed in a divine order running through all of nature, a rational fire or logos that made sense of everything. The Gospel of John opens by saying, "In the beginning was the Logos." This wasn't just poetic. The word was chosen for its philosophical power. Early Christian writers were building bridges. They wanted to show that the truth they preached could fulfill the deepest insights of earlier philosophies. Many early church fathers were trained in Stoic or Stoic-influenced thinking before converting. Thinkers like Clement of Alexandria and Justin Martyr valued reason and admired Stoic ethics. They praised the discipline of men who lived by principle, who scorned wealth, who were unafraid of death. These were not enemies to Christianity. They were, at first, models of what human reason could achieve without revelation. But admiration only went so far. Because at the heart of Stoicism was an idea that early Christians couldn't accept: determinism. Stoicism taught that everything happens according to fate, that every event, down to the smallest detail, is part of a fixed chain of cause and effect, governed by reason. For Stoics, human freedom lay only in how one responded to this chain, not in changing it. Christianity, on the other hand, taught about a personal God who intervened in history, who created freely, acted with intention, and offered redemption through choice. The Christian view of the world required a space for grace, a possibility that things could change, not because they had to, but because love made them so. The idea of prayer, of miracles, of divine compassion did not sit easily with Stoic necessity. This was the beginning of the divide. While the ethical teaching still held value, the philosophical core of Stoicism became too rigid for a faith rooted in hope. The Stoic view of the universe was orderly but impersonal. Christianity insisted that the world was not only rational but also relational. That truth was not just discovered through thought, but revealed through a person, Jesus Christ. For Christians, the path to salvation wasn't just about self-mastery. It was about surrender, faith, and transformation through grace. While Stoics believed that a wise person could be content in any situation by following reason, Christians believed that true peace came through a relationship with God. This was more than a difference in emphasis. It was a difference in worldview. And yet, the influence of Stoicism remained. Even as the Church distanced itself from Stoic cosmology, it continued to draw on its language and values. Monks practiced detachment. Saints wrote about enduring suffering with peace. Confessors encouraged moral self-examination. These practices, while rooted in Scripture, were shaped by centuries of philosophical tradition. The Stoic call to live in harmony with nature was replaced by a call to live according to God's will. But the daily tools, reflection, discipline, restraint, remained. Some Christian thinkers, like Augustine, were deeply aware of Stoicism's limitations. He wrote about how pride could twist Stoic self-reliance into arrogance. He warned that without love, even the most virtuous life would fall short. For him, Stoic calm was not enough. The human heart needed more than control. It needed redemption. And yet, others saw value in the Stoic ideal of apatheia, not indifference, but freedom from passion's control. Christian thinkers reinterpreted this as a kind of holy peace, a soul no longer ruled by sin. In this way, Stoic goals were baptized, reshaped to fit a new theological frame. The turning point came when the Church became a central institution. As it gained power and influence, it needed to define itself clearly. Stoicism, with its rationalism and impersonal universe, no longer fit. The Church emphasized doctrines of free will, divine providence, and a future shaped by moral choice. Stoicism faded from public life, surviving mostly in texts copied by monks or discussed in academic margins. Still, its fingerprints never vanished. Even today, when people speak of being grounded, of accepting what cannot be changed, or of training the mind against distraction, they echo ancient Stoic wisdom. And when Christians speak of peace beyond understanding or enduring trials with grace, they touch something very close to what Stoics called virtue in alignment with nature. The relationship between Stoicism and Christianity was never simple. It began with shared values, passed through periods of cautious borrowing, and ended in sharp theological disagreement. But this tension itself is revealing. It shows that great ideas don't exist in isolation. They cross boundaries. They challenge and reshape each other. And in doing so, they offer richer paths to truth. Tonight, as stillness settles around you, remember that even the deepest differences can grow from common soil. That the questions of how to live, how to endure, and how to seek peace have always brought people together, even when their answers diverge. And somewhere between logic and love, reason and revelation, there is still space for reflection. A space where two ancient traditions once met, not as enemies, but as seekers. Even the deepest differences between Stoicism and early Christianity couldn't erase their shared concern for how a person should live. Both sought a way through pain, a higher standard of behavior, and the possibility of peace in a chaotic world. But over time, as religious institutions grew and philosophical schools faded, the voice of Stoicism softened, never fully disappearing, only waiting. And in the modern world, it has returned again, not from temples or churches, but from conference rooms, podcasts, and startup culture. Today, Stoicism echoes through sleek offices, in the voices of entrepreneurs quoting Marcus Aurelius between meetings, or investors referencing Epictetus in interviews about discipline. Across social media feeds and best-selling self-help books, ancient lines appear beside bulletproof coffee and productivity hacks. There are Stoic-themed apps and morning routines shaped by meditations. But the question many people now ask is this: has Stoicism been reborn, or has it been repackaged? Has it evolved to fit the modern age, or has it been stripped of its soul? This new version of Stoicism is often called Silicon Valley Stoicism. It lives in the world of tech startups, optimization culture, and personal development. It speaks in slogans and systems. It emphasizes grit, focus, resilience, and minimalism. And in many ways, these values align with ancient teachings. The Stoics did praise discipline, encouraged detachment from luxury, and taught people to accept hardship with grace. So it's not wrong to draw on those lessons in a fast-paced world filled with distraction. But ancient Stoicism was never only about performance. It wasn't designed to make someone more productive, wealthy, or influential. Its goal was virtue, a life lived in accordance with reason and nature, guided by wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. Success was not the prize, character was. Today, that deeper purpose is often missed. In many circles, Stoicism has become a tool for control, not reflection. It's used to ignore emotion rather than understand it, to numb discomfort rather than grow through it, to gain an edge rather than lose ego. This shift changes the heart of the practice. What was once a philosophy of humility becomes a tool for dominance. What was once about community becomes focused on personal achievement. Some modern interpretations emphasize mental toughness without the context of ethics. For example, when someone repeats, "You control how you respond," it's often used to shut down emotion, not to cultivate thoughtful response. Ancient Stoics didn't reject emotion, they questioned its origin. They didn't ask people to suppress feeling, but to examine it. To ask, is this reaction helping me live with integrity? Does it align with my values? In contrast, the modern use of Stoicism often skips the values and jumps straight to the control. There is also the issue of selective quoting. Marcus Aurelius is one of the most cited figures in modern Stoic culture, but his words are frequently pulled out of context. His reflections were private, uncertain, and often filled with struggle. He doubted himself. He reminded himself constantly of death, of his smallness, of the impermanence of fame. But in tech culture, his quotes are often used to reinforce confidence, hustle, and invulnerability, values he himself questioned. The adaptation of Stoicism into productivity culture also tends to overlook the Stoic view of community. For the original Stoics, the self was never separate from others. Living in accordance with nature meant living in harmony with the whole. Justice was not optional, it was central. But in modern contexts, Stoicism is often presented as a solo journey, where success is measured by personal gain and self-improvement. The responsibility to others, the ethical weight of our actions, is frequently lost. That doesn't mean Stoicism has no place in the modern world. In fact, its core teachings may be more important now than ever. In a time of constant distraction, it teaches presence. In a culture obsessed with image, it teaches substance. In a system that rewards speed, it reminds us to slow down and reflect. But to do that, it must be practiced fully, not just the parts that feel convenient. There are examples of people who try to live the full spirit of Stoicism today. Entrepreneurs who choose integrity over growth. Leaders who accept failure without blaming others. Individuals who build routines not just for efficiency, but to stay grounded in a world that never stops moving. These people use Stoic principles not to get ahead, but to stay human. And this is where modern Stoicism can evolve with meaning. Not by rejecting new tools, but by reconnecting with old goals. A morning routine is valuable not because it boosts output, but because it anchors you. Journaling matters not because it helps hit KPIs, but because it helps you see yourself clearly. Meditation, cold exposure, digital minimalism, these are all useful when rooted in a bigger frame, a life aimed at wisdom, not performance. Ancient Stoics didn't talk about hustle. They talked about harmony. They didn't preach optimization. They preached observation. They asked what kind of person you should become, not how much you could accomplish. They measured success in alignment, not applause. If modern Stoicism is to remain authentic, it must return to those questions. The rise of Stoicism in tech culture also reveals a hunger, a deep need for something stable. In a world of rapid change, moral uncertainty, and emotional exhaustion, people are looking for an anchor. Stoicism offers clarity. It says, you don't have to be ruled by every headline, every setback, every opinion. You can choose your response. You can shape your thoughts. You can return to reason. That message resonates, but it only heals if it's practiced in full. To bring Stoicism into the modern world without losing its core, we must teach the whole philosophy. Not just quotes, but context. Not just strength, but humility. Not just control, but compassion. We must remember that the goal is not to become unshakable for the sake of success, but to become good for the sake of everyone around us. The original Stoics warned against arrogance. They cautioned against pride in one's wisdom. They reminded themselves daily of mortality, of the limits of knowledge, of the briefness of life. In today's culture of bold declarations and personal brands, these reminders are not weakness, they are medicine. So the evolution of Stoicism doesn't need to be a misuse. It can be a revival, but only if we're willing to go deeper, to move beyond the surface of discipline and into the heart of ethics, to ask not just how to win the day, but how to live the kind of life that leaves the world better. As the lights fade and the noise settles, remember that strength without direction can still lead you astray. Focus without purpose can still leave you empty. What matters is not how Stoicism looks from the outside, but whether it points you inward, whether it leads you back to what's essential, and whether it helps you become someone worth following, not just someone who performs well. That's where the ancient and the modern can meet, in the quiet space between ambition and reflection, in the decision to think clearly, act justly, and live in tune with values that do not change with trends, not as a strategy, but as a commitment, not as a life hack, but as a way of life. The call to return to what's essential, rather than what simply performs, leads to deeper questions. Beneath the Stoic routines, beneath the discipline, beyond even the ethics, there is a vision of the world that shaped every Stoic thought. This vision wasn't just philosophical, it was cosmic. A system not only for how to live, but for what life is. The ideas that grounded Marcus Aurelius in the chaos of war, that helped Epictetus endure slavery, and that offered a compass to those overwhelmed by choice and uncertainty, all came from this vision. To understand Stoicism completely, you must look at how the Stoics saw the universe itself. They believed that everything, every event, every breath, every life and death unfolds within a single living whole. The cosmos, to the Stoics, was not random or mechanical. It was alive, not alive like a creature, but infused with intelligence. This intelligence was called the logos, a word that meant reason, order, structure. It was the rational principle that shaped the universe from the inside out, like a flame that burns through every part of existence, giving it form and direction. This divine fire was not separate from nature, it was nature. The sun, the stars, the cycles of growth and decay, even the flow of thoughts in the human mind, these were all expressions of logos. To the Stoics, nothing in the universe was unconnected. Everything happened for a reason, because reason itself was the fabric of the world. This view was not meant to comfort people with fantasies of control. In fact, it did the opposite. It asked them to accept that they could not stop what was coming. Death, loss, failure, all of it was part of a vast, unfolding order that no person could escape. But rather than leading to despair, this insight was meant to liberate. Because while you cannot change the order, you can choose how to live within it. That is the paradox at the heart of Stoic thought. The universe is deterministic. Everything is caused by what came before. And yet, human beings have freedom. Not the freedom to change the chain, but the freedom to understand their place in it. You cannot control the world, but you can control whether you resist it blindly or accept it with wisdom. This acceptance was not passive, it was active alignment. The Stoic goal was to live according to nature, and nature, as they defined it, was both physical and moral. It was the structure of the universe and the blueprint for virtue. To live in harmony with it meant to live with reason, justice, and courage, not because those things would help you succeed, but because they were the way the universe itself was structured. Understanding this cosmic order also gave Stoics a different view of fate. Fate was not a force that crushed the will. It was the name they gave to the totality of causes, stretching back endlessly, linking every moment to the next. You were not separate from fate. You were part of it. Your thoughts, choices, and even your resistance were links in the same chain. This meant that what felt like personal tragedy might be part of something far larger, something shaped by the same intelligence that spun the stars. This idea gave Stoics a kind of emotional clarity. They didn't ask why something bad happened to them. They asked how they could meet it with virtue. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he was a small part of a great whole, that his pain, his frustration, his personal struggles were like a scratch on the skin of the cosmos, real but not defining. This perspective also made Stoics deeply committed to the idea of unity. If everything was part of one living whole, then all people shared in the same source. There was no true separation between rich and poor, citizen and foreigner, friend and stranger. All were expressions of the same divine reason. This belief in universal connection was not abstract. It shaped how Stoics viewed justice, duty, and even empathy. When someone wronged them, Stoics tried to see that person as acting from ignorance, not evil. If the universe was rational, then people made mistakes because they didn't understand their part in it. This led to patience rather than vengeance. To forgive someone was not weakness, it was wisdom, because it aligned with how the cosmos itself worked. This understanding also transformed the meaning of death. To a Stoic, death was not the end of existence, but a return to the elements, a return to the whole. Life came from the cosmos and returned to it, like a spark flickering back into fire. To fear death was to misunderstand nature. You don't fear a leaf falling because you know it's part of a cycle. The same was true for human life. That sense of scale allowed Stoics to stay calm in the face of chaos. They knew that fortune rises and falls, but that reason endures. That storms may come, but they are part of a weather system much larger than any individual. Their peace came not from avoiding difficulty, but from seeing difficulty as part of a world that made sense, even if that sense was beyond them. They also believed that each person carried a piece of the divine fire within. The rational soul was not just a function of the brain, it was a fragment of logos. This meant that self-mastery was sacred. To act with clarity, to choose what is right, to discipline the passions, these were not just moral acts, they were acts of cosmic alignment. In this way, every decision became part of a sacred order, not because someone was watching, but because the universe itself responded to reason. Every time a person chose virtue over impulse, they affirmed their place in the design. Every time they turned away from anger or greed, they acted not just for themselves, but in tune with the deep rhythm of existence. This belief gave Stoics a powerful sense of responsibility. If you were part of the cosmos, then your actions mattered, not just in small, practical ways, but in the spiritual architecture of reality. To be unjust was not just to harm others, it was to disturb the harmony of the whole. To be cruel, selfish, or dishonest was to act against the very nature that gave you life. And yet, this vision of the universe did not make them rigid. They knew the world was complex. They knew that sometimes choices were unclear, that emotions were strong, that mistakes would happen. But they also knew that returning to reason again and again was the path to peace. Not a forced calm, but a calm rooted in understanding. Modern people often struggle with questions about meaning. Stoicism answered those questions not with fantasy, but with structure. It didn't offer a God who intervened in every moment, but a universe that made sense if you looked closely. It didn't promise a reward for good behavior, but peace for those who lived with clarity. It didn't erase pain, but gave it context. This context changes everything. When you see yourself as part of something vast and ordered, your problems don't disappear, but they shrink. When you believe that your mind reflects the same reason that moves the stars, you treat it with care. When you feel that your duty is not just social but cosmic, you rise to meet it with more strength. That is what the Stoic cosmos offered. Not escape, but belonging. Not answers to every question, but a frame in which questions could be held without fear. It taught that life was not random, that suffering was not punishment, and that peace was not passivity. It was understanding your place in the living structure of all things. As the night deepens and thought slows, rest in this truth. You are not separate from the world. You are not outside of reason. The same force that guides the turning of the earth lives in your ability to choose wisely. And that choice, repeated with care, is your way of honoring the flame that shaped the stars and gave shape to you. Recognizing yourself as part of a vast and intelligent universe can bring a deep sense of peace, but even that understanding fades without effort. Insight alone cannot carry you through the storms of daily life. Even the wisest person, if left unguarded, can slip into old habits, sharp words, or emotional spirals. This is why the ancient Stoics didn't stop at theory. They built a daily system to keep their minds strong and steady. Not a one-time revelation, but a lifelong rhythm of reflection and practice. Stoicism was never meant to be just a set of beliefs. It was a craft. And like any craft, it needed repetition, attention, and tools. The Stoics treated philosophy like a physical discipline. You wouldn't expect a body to grow strong without daily exercise. In the same way, they believed the soul had to be trained regularly. Without daily work, clarity would vanish, patience would crumble, and virtue would weaken under pressure. The day began with preparation. Before the world had a chance to press itself onto them, Stoics pressed their own values into the day. They used a form of mental rehearsal. This wasn't fantasy or escape. It was practical visualization. They would walk through the hours ahead in their minds, what they expected to face, who they might meet, what challenges could arise, and more importantly, how they intended to meet those things with reason. This practice helped reduce surprise. When someone insulted them, they had already prepared for it. When plans changed or frustrations appeared, they reminded themselves that this was part of the expected pattern. It wasn't about dulling emotion. It was about making space between stimulus and response. In that space, they could choose their reaction rather than be dragged by it. Another central habit was journaling. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is perhaps the most famous example, but many Stoics kept private notes. They didn't write for others. They wrote to sharpen their thoughts, to untangle emotions, and to reconnect with their values. These notes were sometimes questions. Why did I lose my temper? What was I avoiding today? What would a wise person have done in that moment? And sometimes affirmations. I cannot control others, only myself. Today I will act with justice. Let me not waste this day. Evening review was just as important. At the end of the day, they didn't simply fall into sleep. They paused to examine what they had done well and where they had strayed. They didn't do this with harsh judgment, but with honesty. The goal was not shame, it was correction. Like a craftsman inspecting tools, they asked, is anything dull, rusting, damaged? What needs care? What needs sharpening? They understood that failure was part of practice. You fall, but you rise again with more insight. By seeing mistakes clearly and regularly, they prevented those mistakes from becoming patterns. Each evening became an opportunity to begin again. This rhythm of reset kept them from drifting too far from their path. Breath control was another subtle but vital part of Stoic training. While they didn't develop it into a full system like later schools, they knew that the breath was a bridge between mind and body. Slow, steady breathing grounded the mind. It created a pause, a still point in moments of anxiety or anger. In stressful situations, Stoics returned to their breath. Not because it solved the problem, but because it gave them a foundation from which to face it clearly. They also practiced voluntary discomfort. This wasn't about punishment or proving strength. It was about training desire. The Stoics believed that luxury could weaken the will, so they deliberately chose small hardships to remind themselves of what they could live without. Seneca would sleep on the floor, eat plain food, or wear rough clothing, not because he needed to, but to prepare himself in case comfort was taken away. These practices built resilience. When you've practiced going without, you fear loss less. When you've chosen discomfort, you're not broken by it when it arrives without warning. This gave the Stoics a calm that was not passive, but earned. They also trained their perception. The Stoics believed that most suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the way we interpret them. So they worked daily to challenge impressions. When something upset them, they paused to ask, is this truly bad, or have I judged it so? Is this a disaster or simply unexpected? By questioning their first reaction, they loosened the grip of emotion and made space for better thinking. This wasn't cold analysis. It was compassionate clarity. The Stoics didn't want to become indifferent. They wanted to remain in control of themselves so they could help others, fulfill duties, and act with kindness even when under pressure. Their calmness was not detachment, it was service. You cannot offer peace to others if you are always at war within yourself. They also used maxims, short phrases repeated throughout the day to anchor the mind. These were like mental handholds. In moments of stress or temptation, a simple phrase could cut through the noise. This too shall pass. What is up to me? Be indifferent to what makes no difference. These lines weren't decorations, they were tools for real-time clarity. The Stoics did not rely on motivation. They relied on preparation. They knew that willpower fades, so they built routines that didn't depend on emotion. Even when they felt tired, doubtful, or distracted, their practices gave them a structure to return to. That consistency built a kind of quiet strength, steady, grounded, and dependable. Their diet, sleep, and physical health were also part of their discipline. They didn't obsess over perfection, but they saw the body as a servant of the soul. A tired, sick, or overstimulated body made it harder to think clearly. So they aimed for balance, enough sleep to function, enough movement to stay strong, enough nourishment to support thought. They didn't separate the mind from the body. They saw both as part of one system. They also practiced gratitude, though not always in the way it's described today. Stoic gratitude was not about celebrating what's pleasant. It was about appreciating what exists, even when it's difficult. To wake up alive, to have a chance to act justly, to meet another day with purpose. These were seen as gifts, not entitlements. Their connection to nature was central. They saw themselves as part of the natural world, not above it. They spent time observing it, learning from its rhythms, aligning their choices with its order. A falling leaf, a rising sun, a changing season, each offered a lesson in acceptance, resilience, and return. Nature wasn't just scenery, it was a teacher. The Stoic day was built around reminders, reminders of mortality, reminders of duty, reminders of perspective. They carried these reminders not to fear death, but to focus on life. You could leave life right now, Marcus wrote. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. These were not morbid thoughts. They were clarifying ones. Time is limited. Use it well. Their community also shaped their practice. Stoicism wasn't always solitary. They exchanged letters, gathered in schools, discussed challenges. They offered corrections with respect, encouraged each other toward higher standards. They didn't aim to be perfect alone. They aimed to grow together. All of these habits created a kind of internal architecture, a set of supports that held the mind upright, especially when life shook. This architecture didn't eliminate struggle, but it gave the Stoics a way to meet it with strength, with purpose, and with dignity. Tonight, as the day fades, let yourself rest in the rhythm of these ancient routines, not as rules, but as reminders. That clarity takes care. That peace is built step by step. That daily practice is not about perfection, but about returning again and again to what matters most, and that even in the smallest acts, breathing, reflecting, choosing, you are shaping the person you become. Practices grounded in daily effort gave Stoicism a strength few philosophies have matched. But no matter how polished the habits, how refined the thoughts, or how structured the worldview, every system of belief meets resistance. And it should, because no philosophy is complete without friction. No idea stands in its full strength until it has been questioned deeply, sometimes even painfully. The Stoics were not alone in their search for wisdom, and those who challenged them, particularly the Epicureans and the skeptics, did so not from ignorance, but from serious concern. Criticism did not always come in the form of hostility. Sometimes it was curiosity dressed as contradiction. Other times it was a refusal to accept the calm that Stoicism presented as ideal. The Epicureans believed the Stoics misunderstood happiness. The skeptics thought they claimed to know too much. And both schools, in their own ways, saw dangers hidden beneath the Stoic structure. The Epicureans, followers of Epicurus, built their philosophy on a different foundation. Where Stoics spoke of virtue as the only good, the Epicureans held pleasure, particularly the absence of pain and fear, as the goal of life. They believed the Stoics demanded too much of people, that they made life harder by trying to be indifferent to pleasure and pain. To the Epicureans, this indifference was unnatural and unnecessary. They also questioned the Stoic attitude toward emotions. While Stoics aimed to train emotional responses through reason, Epicureans thought that trying to suppress or eliminate emotion led to repression, not clarity. They saw joy, friendship, and simple pleasures as essential, not distractions, but part of a wise life. Their goal wasn't indulgence, but freedom from disturbance. Peace, not through detachment, but through the careful selection of what truly brings happiness. This difference created a deep divide. Stoics feared that chasing pleasure led to dependence, that if your happiness came from external things, you were always at risk. Epicureans believed that if you rejected all pleasure, you lost something human. They warned that Stoicism could lead to coldness, to self-denial for its own sake, and to an unrealistic idea of virtue that ignored the emotional needs of real people. They also raised questions about death. Stoics saw death as a return to nature, something to be met without fear. Epicureans agreed that death should not be feared, but for a different reason. They taught that when we die, we simply cease to exist. There is no afterlife, no punishment, no continued awareness. Therefore, fearing death is irrational because it is the end of all sensation. Where Stoics framed death as part of a cosmic plan, Epicureans framed it as the final limit, no different than the time before our birth. Their criticism challenged the Stoic idea of enduring hardship for the sake of virtue. Why endure suffering when one could avoid it? Why accept pain to remain in harmony with a universal order if that order doesn't feel or care? They believed that unnecessary suffering, when avoidable, should be avoided, not spiritualized. Then came the skeptics, particularly the academic skeptics and the Pyrrhonists. Their challenge went even deeper. They questioned whether anyone could be certain of anything. While the Stoics believed that the human mind could grasp truth through reason and the right impressions, the skeptics doubted that certainty was ever possible. For them, every belief could be countered, every perception questioned, every truth held loosely. Their method was relentless. For every claim, they asked for proof. For every piece of proof, they asked if it too could be doubted. The Stoics taught that some impressions are cataleptic, clear, undeniable, and trustworthy. The skeptics responded by saying, "How do you know?" This posed a real problem. If you cannot trust your senses or your reason, how can you build a philosophy of life? The skeptics didn't offer comfort. They offered stillness through suspension of judgment. Their ideal was not knowledge, but peace through non-assertion. Rather than claim what is right, they trained themselves to refrain from judgment and remain in balance between extremes. Stoics saw this as dangerous. Without conviction, how could anyone act with courage? How could anyone make moral choices if all opinions are held loosely? To the Stoic mind, skepticism risked moral paralysis, doing nothing in the name of uncertainty. But the skeptics had their own warning. They feared that certainty breeds arrogance, that believing you've found the truth can blind you to what you've missed. Both critiques had weight. Epicureans pointed to emotional balance and human pleasure, warning against the hardness of Stoic indifference. Skeptics reminded everyone that no system, no matter how elegant, is beyond doubt. And the Stoics, to their credit, took these critiques seriously. They didn't abandon their core beliefs, but they refined them. Later Stoics, especially those like Marcus Aurelius, included more emotional depth and personal reflection. Their language became less rigid, more humane. The skeptics also influenced Stoic logic. Chrysippus himself worked to strengthen the tools by which judgments were made, building systems that could respond to doubt with clarity, not dismissal. He didn't ignore the question, "How do you know?" He tried to answer it better. These conversations did not end in the ancient world. Today, modern psychology echoes the Epicurean concern for emotional regulation and positive experience. The value of friendship, of small pleasures, of meaningful relationships, they are not luxuries. They are part of what makes a life whole. And modern science keeps skepticism alive. We test, we revise, we doubt. We avoid claims of absolute truth. In this sense, both critiques remain active and useful. A healthy Stoicism today includes room for these challenges. It recognizes that avoiding all pleasure may become avoidance of joy, that too much confidence in our reason may blind us to what lies beyond it, that emotional warmth is not weakness, that questions do not destroy truth, they protect it. A richer Stoicism acknowledges emotion not just as a force to manage, but as a part of being human that can be refined. Not all emotions must be fought. Some can be guided, deepened, and made part of a balanced inner life. Love, compassion, awe. These are not distractions from virtue. They can be expressions of it, and clarity does not have to mean certainty. One can act with confidence and still accept that knowledge is incomplete. Courage is not the absence of doubt. It is choosing well even when some doubt remains. This is where the Stoic can learn from the skeptic, not to abandon values, but to hold them with humility. Critique is not a threat to philosophy. It is its companion, a mirror that shows what we might otherwise miss. The Epicureans and skeptics gave Stoicism something valuable: contrast. Their presence sharpened its ideas, shaped its direction, and forced it to mature. So as we rest in reflection, we don't have to defend Stoicism against every challenge. We can allow those challenges to guide us deeper. A stronger philosophy is not one that resists all critique, but one that listens, learns, and grows. In that, the Stoic becomes not rigid, but resilient, not fixed, but grounded. And that kind of grounding, steady and open, is what makes the path not just smart, but wise, not just functional, but whole, not just strong, but truly human. Honest critique does not weaken a system, it refines it. When Epicureans and skeptics questioned the limits of Stoic logic and emotional discipline, they drew attention to what might otherwise be ignored. That discomfort revealed places where depth could grow, and it revealed something else. That reason alone, though essential, is not the only way we connect with the world. There is another path, quieter and less defined, but no less important. That path is beauty. In the common image of the Stoic, beauty is often left out. The focus on detachment, control, and discipline gives the impression that art, nature, and aesthetic pleasure had no place in their worldview. But this is not the full picture. The Stoics did not ignore beauty. They simply approached it from a different angle. For them, beauty was not something to chase or possess. It was something to observe, understand, and align with. It was not an escape from reason, but a reflection of it. The Stoic understanding of the cosmos as a living, rational whole shaped how they saw all forms of beauty. A flower was not beautiful because it pleased the eye. It was beautiful because it expressed order. Its symmetry, its pattern, its role in nature's cycle, these were all signs of a deeper intelligence. Beauty, then, was not a trick of the senses. It was a signpost pointing towards structure and harmony. This is why the Stoics respected nature so deeply, not as a source of inspiration alone, but as a teacher of form. The flowing of rivers, the rising of the sun, the slow decay of time on stone, all of it reflected the universal logic that Stoics called logos. To study beauty was not to lose oneself in feeling, but to trace the marks left by reason on the physical world. This perspective extended into art. The Stoics did not reject poetry, sculpture, or music, but they evaluated these forms by what they revealed, not by how they entertained. A piece of art that stirred emotion was not automatically good. Its value came from whether it guided the soul toward virtue, understanding, or harmony. Art was not to flatter the ego or feed desire. It was to refine perception. Seneca, in his letters, praised passages of poetry that captured the truth of human nature. He found value in lines that turned the reader inward, that prompted moral insight, or offered calm in distress. But he warned against art that played only to passion, works that stirred people without grounding them. For the Stoic, this kind of stimulation was dangerous because it pulled attention away from what matters most, living well. Yet this didn't mean that emotion had no place in art. The Stoics understood that beauty could move a person, but they asked, toward what end? If a painting stirs longing for wealth or vanity, it clouds the mind. If it evokes awe for nature's balance or compassion for another's pain, it aligns with reason. In this way, aesthetic experience was not forbidden. It was filtered through ethical awareness. Even the Stoic ideal of detachment did not mean cold indifference. It meant not clinging. You could appreciate beauty without being possessed by it. You could look at a sculpture, admire its form, reflect on its message, and then walk away unchanged in your core desires. This was the goal, to experience the world fully but not be ruled by any part of it. The Stoics also applied these ideas inward. They saw inner beauty as the highest kind, not beauty shaped by face or body, but by soul. A person who acted with justice, courage, and wisdom radiated something deeper than charm. They reflected order. Their life had structure. Their choices followed reason. And that, to a Stoic, was the most enduring and meaningful form of beauty. This view shaped how they thought about aging, illness, and physical decline. In a culture that prized youth and strength, Stoics praised the lines of age as signs of endurance. They respected simplicity in appearance, not because they rejected aesthetics, but because they valued what lasted over what faded. To them, a face marked by time was not something to hide. It was evidence of a life engaged with truth. They saw beauty not as an object, but as a process. A sunset was beautiful not because it was perfect, but because it passed. Its fading reminded them of impermanence, of rhythm, of return. In the same way, a well-lived life was beautiful not because it was always graceful, but because it was real, shaped by choice, shaped by effort. There was also a kind of artistic practice in Stoicism itself. The way a person lived could be sculpted like stone. Words could be shaped like poetry. Actions could be composed like music. The Stoic believed that living well was an art form. It required attention to proportion, clarity of structure, and commitment to purpose. Each day was a line in the poem, each decision a stroke of the brush. This idea brought humility, because just as a sculptor learns through mistakes, a Stoic learned through reflection. There was no final masterpiece, only the effort to bring form to something as unpredictable as life. That effort, honest, disciplined, and thoughtful, was itself a kind of beauty. In this light, detachment becomes appreciation without anxiety. You are not gripped by the fear of loss. You admire, then release. You witness, then return to the core. Beauty enhances life, but it does not define it. The Stoic does not retreat from the world. They walk through it with eyes open, but with judgment intact. This kind of clarity allows deeper gratitude, not the gratitude of ownership, but of presence. A tree, a face, a piece of music. Each becomes a chance to reflect on the order that holds the world together. You don't need to possess what you find beautiful. You only need to see it clearly, to understand what it reflects, and to move forward with that understanding intact. Even silence held beauty for the Stoics. In stillness, there was space for thought to settle. In quiet, there was room for proportion and perspective. They knew that constant stimulation dulled perception, that sometimes the most beautiful experiences were the simplest ones: a quiet walk, a thoughtful conversation, a clean space. These were not grand, but they brought the mind back to itself. The aesthetic sense in Stoicism was not decoration. It was discipline, not suppression, but refinement. It asked people to choose what to admire and to be cautious about what they allowed to shape their hearts, because beauty has power, and all power, if left unchecked, can mislead. But when beauty points to truth, when it strengthens understanding, when it deepens the love of wisdom, it becomes something sacred. A mirror, not of ego, but of order. A reminder, not of lack, but of alignment. So as your thoughts slow and your day settles, notice what you've found beautiful. Ask not whether it entertained, but whether it revealed. Whether it made space for thought. Whether it connected you to something more enduring than yourself. In that space, Stoicism becomes not just a shield, but a lens. And through that lens, the world becomes not only bearable, but filled with a quiet, lasting form of grace. To see beauty clearly without needing to own it is a kind of freedom. It teaches detachment not as coldness, but as deeper respect for the world, for others, and for time itself. But there is one truth that brings all this into focus more sharply than any painting, poem, or sculpture. A truth that waits at the edge of every moment and gives shape to all others: death. And how we choose to face it reveals the very structure of our philosophy. The Stoics did not fear death. They did not glorify it either. They accepted it as part of the natural cycle, neither enemy nor punishment, but simply a boundary, a marker, a return. To them, death was not a threat to be ignored or hidden away. It was a teacher, and its lesson was simple. Life is short, so use it well. This mindset became one of the most powerful and lasting parts of Stoic thought. It shaped how people lived and how they prepared to die. The phrase, memento mori, remember that you will die, is not a warning meant to cause panic. It is a call to awareness. To remember death is to remember life, not in a shallow or anxious way, but with clarity. Every choice becomes more meaningful when you know it may be your last. The Stoics practiced this awareness daily. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about the shortness of life, not to scare himself, but to stay focused. He reminded himself that most of what we worry about will not matter at the end. That the praise of others, the pursuit of status, the need to control, none of it travels beyond the grave. What lasts is how we lived, how we treated others, how closely we followed reason. Seneca took it further. In his letters, he said that learning to die is the key to learning how to live, because the person who no longer fears death is free. Free from manipulation, free from delay, free to speak truth, to act now. Death was not something to avoid thinking about. It was something to keep in view, like a compass, always pointing us back to what matters. This practice was not unique to Stoicism, but Stoicism gave it a language that others could adopt, and many did. The idea of memento mori traveled through history, shaping cultures far beyond Rome. In medieval Christianity, monks kept skulls in their cells, not to worship, but to remind themselves that each day was a gift. That time could not be wasted. In Japan, the samurai code of Bushido echoed Stoic principles. Samurai were trained to meditate on death regularly. They were taught that only by accepting death could they act with full presence and courage. A warrior who fears death hesitates. A warrior who accepts death chooses with clarity. This is not brutality. It is awareness sharpened to action. Victorian mourning culture, often seen as rigid or morbid, was also influenced by older ideas about accepting loss. Mourners wore black not just out of duty, but as a public recognition of grief. Death was not hidden. It was expressed, ritualized, and acknowledged. While the customs could be formal, the intent was to integrate death into life, not to pretend it wasn't there. In art and literature, memento mori appeared as symbols: a skull on a desk, a wilted flower, a candle about to go out. These were not only symbols of decay, they were reminders to pay attention, to love what you have while you have it, to be present, because presence is all that can truly be kept. Even in modern psychology, the power of accepting death has been rediscovered. Studies show that those who contemplate mortality regularly often report greater life satisfaction. They take fewer things for granted. They make decisions based on values, not fear. The Stoics understood this long before data confirmed it. They knew that the denial of death leads to wasted time. That distraction becomes a form of escape. And that escape from reality is the beginning of confusion. By making peace with death, the Stoic becomes more alive. Because every morning becomes a beginning. Every goodbye, a reminder of connection. Every delay, a question worth asking. Is what I'm doing worth the time it's taking from my life? That is the test. Not whether something feels urgent, but whether it feels true. This awareness also changes how we treat others. Knowing that everyone we love will one day die makes kindness more urgent. It reminds us to forgive quickly, to speak gently, to listen more. We stop assuming that there will always be more time, and in doing so, we live more fully within the time we have. The Stoics also taught that death is not the worst thing that can happen. Dishonor, cruelty, cowardice, these are worse, because they corrupt the soul. Death, by contrast, is a natural event. It cannot be avoided, but it can be faced. To die well for a Stoic was not about grandeur. It was about remaining consistent with one's values, even at the end. And this is where their approach to death differs from mere detachment. It is not apathy. It is not coldness. It is reverence, stripped of illusion. To accept death is to stop clinging to illusions of control, to stop pretending that we are owed a certain amount of time. No one is promised tomorrow. The Stoic says, use today as if it were your last, not in panic, but in purpose. This does not mean rushing or burning out. It means choosing deliberately, a walk with a friend, a thoughtful conversation, a simple act of generosity. These are not small if done in awareness. They become sacred because they are fleeting. There is also a quiet courage that comes from this mindset. When fear rises, the Stoic does not pretend to be immune, but they ask, what am I truly afraid of? Pain, loss, the unknown? And then they look closely at each fear. They dissect it. They question it. And in that process, many fears shrink. What cannot be removed is accepted. And in that acceptance, peace grows. This is not a one-time insight. It must be practiced. Death must be remembered gently, daily, not to cause anxiety, but to remove it. To remind us that life is not a rehearsal, that love is not automatic, that purpose is not guaranteed. It is chosen, moment by moment. As this night deepens and the world slows, let the thought of death be not a shadow, but a light, not an ending, but a reason to forgive, to simplify, to be honest, to act. The Stoic sees death not as an interruption, but as part of the whole, and because of that, they live with a rare kind of focus, a love of life unclouded by denial, a dignity shaped not by how long they live, but by how completely they show up before the end. To live with death in view is to live with greater clarity. It sharpens priorities, reveals illusions, and strips away waste. But while death brings urgency, it is our relationship with life's daily choices, what we seek, what we avoid, and what we trade for meaning, that shapes our direction most consistently. And in this area, perhaps nothing reveals our character more than how we handle wealth, labor, and desire. The Stoics understood this well. They did not write about economics in the modern sense, but their views on money, work, and self-control form a powerful early framework for thinking about how we exchange time, energy, and resources. In fact, their insights closely align with ideas that would later be explored in behavioral economics, long before the field even existed. At the center of Stoic thought is the distinction between what is up to us and what is not. Wealth clearly falls into the second category. You can work hard, plan carefully, and still face poverty due to forces beyond your control. Markets crash, health fails, wars erupt. The Stoics did not condemn money, but they saw it for what it was, an external. And externals, by definition, should never determine your inner peace. Yet they knew that wealth was a powerful influence. It shapes behavior, creates dependencies, and invites distortion. So they taught that the true test of wealth is not how much you have, but how little it controls you. Seneca, who himself was wealthy, wrote extensively about the risks of fortune. He warned that possessions often possess the owner, that luxury, once tasted, becomes hard to live without. The appetite grows and freedom shrinks. Self-control, then, became the foundation of economic virtue. The wise person was not one who avoided money, but one who used it wisely. They knew its place. They accepted its utility, but rejected its authority. To them, the key was not just earning, it was detachment. You could have much and live simply. You could have little and still feel secure, because security came from clarity, not from numbers. This approach speaks directly to modern issues. In today's world, where consumption is often tied to identity, the Stoics offer a radical alternative. They remind us that wanting less is more powerful than having more, that no amount of wealth can compensate for a lack of purpose, and that financial freedom begins with mental freedom, from envy, from fear, from the endless race for more. The Stoics also believed that how you earned your wealth mattered. They saw labor as a natural part of human life. Work was not a curse, but a chance to serve, contribute, and develop character. What mattered most was integrity. Was your work honest? Was it aligned with virtue? Did it leave you stronger, clearer, more useful to others? They rejected status for its own sake. A lowly profession done well, with dignity and skill, was more admirable than a high-status role pursued for recognition. Work was not just about results. It was about the person it helped you become. If your labor made you more patient, more thoughtful, more generous, then it was good labor. They also warned against the trap of busyness. Being busy was not the same as being productive. Many people, Seneca observed, fill their days with activity and call it achievement. But unless that activity serves something real, wisdom, justice, contribution, it is only movement, not progress. He advised setting boundaries, knowing when to say no, and remembering that time is our most limited resource. This concept of time management, rooted in values rather than urgency, overlaps with modern behavioral economics. Studies show that people often make poor decisions not because they lack information, but because they lack clarity about what truly matters. The Stoics anticipated this by teaching daily reflection, reviewing how you spent your time, what you pursued, what you delayed. This was part of their discipline. The idea was simple. You cannot improve what you do not observe. They also understood that desire distorts value. Something rare appears valuable simply because it is rare. Something new seems better just because it is different. But the Stoics questioned appearances. They trained themselves to ask, what is this thing really? Is it useful? Is it necessary? Is it worth the price? Not just in money, but in attention, energy, and peace. This kind of thinking undermines impulsive spending. It weakens the grip of advertising. It reduces the likelihood of regret. And it creates a kind of internal stability that money alone cannot provide. You become less vulnerable to manipulation. You stop chasing what others praise and start aligning your actions with your own principles. The Stoics also saw generosity as part of economic life. But their generosity was not about performance. It was about understanding that what you have is not fully yours if it does not serve others. A wise person gives without pride and receives without shame. They see wealth as a tool, not a trophy. and they believe that sharing it wisely strengthens society and sharpens virtue. This view also informed how they thought about debt and obligation. They advised caution with borrowing, not because debt is immoral, but because it can become a chain. If your choices are no longer your own, your freedom is compromised. Independence was not just political, it was personal. And financial dependence, when not chosen with full awareness, was seen as a danger to peace of mind. But they were not rigid. They understood that life includes uncertainty, that sometimes we must accept support or take on risk or work jobs we do not love. The key was to remain conscious, to avoid drifting, to stay aware of the cost of every exchange, to know what you are trading for security, for comfort, for success, and to decide whether that trade is just. Their concept of value was based on use, not price. A simple tool, used well, was worth more than an expensive object that served no purpose. This view challenged the social norms of their time and of ours. It meant that no one could be measured by income alone. That worth was internal, and that true poverty was not lack of funds, but lack of discipline. In this way, Stoicism becomes an economic philosophy grounded in ethics. It invites questions that modern society often avoids. How much is enough? What are you giving up to gain more? Are you acting from choice or from fear? Are you free? The Stoics believed that a person who needs little can never be poor, and a person who is rich in virtue can never be truly harmed. This mindset creates resilience. In a crisis, the Stoic adjusts. In success, they stay humble. In loss, they remain calm. Because their value is not measured by possessions, it is measured by principles. Even in trade and exchange, the Stoics applied reason. Every agreement had to be fair, honest, and free from exploitation. Profit was not wrong, but it could not come at the cost of justice. Business, like everything else, was a chance to live your philosophy, to serve others, to stay honest, and to act in line with nature's order. This level of self-control turns economy into a practice of alignment. It transforms spending into a mirror of values. It turns work into a place of growth. And it creates freedom not through wealth, but through wisdom. So as this moment slows and you pause to reflect, think about what you trade each day, not only with money, but with time, thought, and energy. What is worthy of your effort? What are you chasing? And is it leading you closer to peace or further away? The Stoics offer no promises of riches, but they offer something far rarer, the ability to be content with what is enough and the strength to walk away from what corrupts. This, they believed, was the true wealth, and the only kind no thief can steal. The control of desire and the ethical use of resources offered the Stoics a path toward freedom that few others considered. Not just the freedom to have, but the freedom to choose wisely. Yet in a world where choices are shaped by laws, systems, and power structures, personal self-control is only one piece of a much larger puzzle. To live in harmony with nature, as the Stoics taught, also meant living in society, and this called for courage not only in private, but in public. Stoicism, while deeply internal, was never meant to be isolated. It wasn't just a philosophy of the study or the retreat. It was built to be tested in the forum, in the Senate, and even on the battlefield. Political action, whether through leadership or resistance, was one of the arenas where Stoic virtue either proved itself or fell short. And few ideas in Stoicism mattered more in this space than justice. Justice for the Stoics was not a system of law imposed by the powerful. It was a universal principle rooted in reason and shared humanity. True law, they said, is found in nature, and nature makes no distinction between rulers and citizens, between rich and poor. Therefore, political virtue was judged not by status or office, but by whether one acted in service of the common good, and this belief guided both emperors and rebels. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most famous Stoic ruler, spent much of his reign at war, defending the borders of a strained empire. Yet in his personal writings, he constantly reminded himself that power was fleeting and that his duty was not to conquer, but to rule justly. He called himself a servant of the city. He warned against pride. He reflected daily on his own flaws. His meditations were not speeches of glory, but private efforts to remain grounded, humble, and clear. He believed that being an emperor did not make him exempt from the demands of philosophy. In fact, it made them more urgent. The more power one holds, the more discipline one must exercise. Leadership, to a Stoic, was not a prize. It was a burden that had to be carried with clarity and restraint. The true danger was not the enemy at the gate, but the decay of one's own character under the weight of ego. On the opposite end of the political spectrum stood Cato the Younger, a senator and fierce defender of the Roman Republic. Cato embodied Stoic defiance. He resisted corruption, refused bribes, and stood openly against the rise of Julius Caesar, even when it meant losing influence, allies, and eventually his life. His resistance was not based on ambition, but on principle. He believed that freedom could not survive without courage, and that courage meant saying no, even when silence was safer. Cato's death, a suicide carried out after Caesar's final victory, became a symbol of philosophical martyrdom. For many later Stoics, it was proof that virtue must not bow to tyranny, that even when power wins, character can remain undefeated. It was not the outcome that mattered, it was the integrity of the action. This view shaped how Stoics approached civil disobedience, not as rebellion for its own sake, but as fidelity to a higher order than the laws of men. The Stoics did not reject politics, but they rejected political action rooted in fear, ambition, or revenge. To act politically, in their view, was to act on behalf of all humanity. The Stoic cosmopolis, the idea that all humans belong to a single universal city, meant that justice could not be limited to one's tribe, nation, or class. Decisions had to be made with the good of all in mind, not because of sentiment, but because of reason. This had real consequences. Stoic philosophers like Musonius Rufus were exiled multiple times for speaking out against injustice. Epictetus, though born a slave, taught that everyone had a duty to speak the truth and live with dignity, regardless of social status. They believed that silence in the face of injustice was itself a kind of injustice. But they also believed that resistance must be thoughtful, that anger could not be allowed to guide rebellion. That virtue, even in protest, must remain intact. Their writings suggest a model of civil disobedience that is disciplined, non-violent, and grounded in the pursuit of universal justice. One speaks out not to harm others, but to remind the community of its higher laws. One refuses compliance not for personal pride, but to protect the dignity of all. The Stoic dissenter is not chaotic. They are consistent. They do not rage against the world. They stand firm within it. This kind of Stoicism has influenced political leaders across time. It shaped the quiet strength of thinkers like Frederick Douglass, who studied Marcus Aurelius while fighting for abolition. It informed the posture of leaders like Nelson Mandela, who drew from Stoic principles during long years of imprisonment. Even in systems designed to crush the spirit, Stoic thought offered a structure for endurance, clarity, and unshakable purpose. But Stoicism also demands accountability from those in power. It offers no excuse for the abuse of authority. If power corrupts, it is because the person holding it has failed to practice self-governance. A true Stoic leader does not seek followers. They seek the well-being of the governed. They listen, they admit fault, and they act not from impulse, but from deliberation. In a world of loud promises, this kind of leadership is rare and urgently needed. This philosophy can also inform civic life today. In polarized societies, where disagreement quickly becomes hostility, Stoic restraint offers a way to engage without hatred, to advocate without attacking, to listen without surrendering truth. It reminds us that strength is not loudness, that reasoned speech, respectful disagreement, and calm resistance are forms of power more lasting than force. It also challenges citizens to examine their own role. Democracy is not sustained by outrage alone. It requires discipline, patience, and clarity. It requires people willing to sacrifice convenience for principle. People who know that rights come with responsibilities, and that justice is not a service to be demanded, but a duty to be shared. The Stoics remind us that character must come before outcome, that every vote, every protest, every civic action should first ask, is this aligned with virtue? Does this serve more than just my interest? Does this build a society where reason, dignity, and justice can grow? This is not a passive philosophy. It does not wait for perfection. It acts, but it acts with care, with attention to timing, method, and goal. It does not burn down for the sake of noise. It clears space for something better. It holds power accountable, not just in others, but in oneself. As power continues to shift in the modern world, through movements, platforms, and systems, we can return to this ancient structure. The Stoic citizen is not indifferent. They are engaged, but they are engaged from the inside out. Their protest is principled. Their leadership is modest. Their allegiance is to truth. And when they lose, they do not become bitter. When they win, they do not become arrogant, because they know that true victory is in remaining whole, that every law, every institution, every cause must still pass the higher test. Does this reflect justice not only in words, but in actions? Let this serve as a call to reflection. Whether you hold influence or feel small within the system, you still have agency. The Stoics believed that moral authority cannot be taken. It can only be surrendered, so hold to it. Use it wisely. Let your actions speak not of fear, but of reason, not of anger, but of conscience. That is political Stoicism, not an ideology, but a way of moving through power with integrity that endures. Integrity in the political realm, whether from a citizen resisting injustice or a ruler applying justice with restraint, depends on one crucial resource: time. Power exists in time. So does choice, speech, silence, delay, action, and the weight of every outcome. Time frames every decision, defines every consequence, and ultimately determines how a life is remembered. But while many chase the future or grieve the past, the Stoics stood still in the middle and asked a deeper question: what is time really, and how should we live inside it? For the Stoics, time was not just a measure of moments. It was a force, a cycle, and a teacher. They believed the universe itself was bound to time, not in a straight line, but in a loop. Events did not unfold randomly. Everything was connected through an unbroken chain of cause and effect, governed by reason and bound to repeat in infinite recurrence. What has happened will happen again. What is true now was true before and will be again. This view is not cold, it is grounding. If time is a loop, then your choices are not isolated. They are echoes of every other choice made by people like you in situations like yours. There is a pattern, and because there is a pattern, you are never truly alone in your experience. You walk paths that others have walked. You face fears that have been faced. This, the Stoics believed, could be a source of great calm. But time was not only cyclical to them, it was present. The past was gone and untouchable. The future was unknown and beyond grasp. Only the present moment could be known, shaped, or experienced directly. This made presence not just a mental habit, but a moral stance. To live outside the present was, in a sense, to abandon your duty. Because if virtue is action, and action only occurs now, then now is where life happens. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. He warned against pouring our energy into what might be, what could happen, or what we failed to do. Anticipation and regret were mental traps. Not because the past or future were unimportant, but because our relationship to them was often distorted. The mind adds weight to events that do not need it. Fear grows in the space of uncertainty. But in the present, everything can be seen more clearly. This approach influenced how Stoics dealt with anxiety. When you worry, you're often reacting not to what is real, but to what is possible. The mind races through imagined outcomes, most of which never come. The Stoic method is to pause, assess, and ask, what is happening right now? What is required of me in this exact moment? This practice pulls attention away from illusion and back toward clarity. They didn't deny the past, they learned from it. Marcus Aurelius reflected often on mortality and the lives of those who came before him. He reminded himself that even the most powerful were eventually forgotten, that the names once shouted in the streets now live only in stone or dust. This awareness was not depressing, it was humbling. It stripped away pride and helped him focus on what could be done with the time remaining. The Stoics believed that each moment was a gift, not because it was special, but because it was real. It was the only place where thought could meet action, where values could take shape in behavior, and where the self could be tested and formed. This emphasis on presence shaped how they spoke, how they judged, how they listened, and how they chose. They also knew that perception is bound to time. What you think is happening can change as the moment unfolds. A delay can feel like failure, then become a gift. A loss can feel devastating, then reveal itself as freedom. The Stoics trained themselves to slow down their interpretation, to wait for more perspective before forming conclusions. Time, for them, was not just ticking, it was offering data, context, and insight. This belief also gave them patience. If the universe is governed by cause and effect, and if you are living according to nature, then things will unfold as they must. You do your part. You let the rest unfold. Waiting was not weakness, it was trust in order. But waiting was never passive. It was still filled with awareness and attention. You act when the time is right, not just when the emotion is strong. The Stoic relationship with time was also reflected in their rituals. Morning reflection was about preparing the mind for the hours ahead. Evening review was about harvesting meaning from what had passed. But neither was an escape from the now. Each was a return. What did I do today? How did I meet this moment? What do I owe the next one? They were also deeply aware of the speed of life. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about how fast everything passes. Empires fall, families change, health fades. What matters today will fade tomorrow. This did not lead him to despair. It made him more present. When you know a thing will end, you give it more care. You stop postponing love. You stop delaying courage. This view also shaped how they saw control. We often try to stretch ourselves across time to manage what cannot be held. We try to fix the past or script the future. The Stoics believed that the only thing worth controlling was perception in the present, that clarity now would shape better actions later, that judgment now could reduce regret later. But control over time itself, that was illusion. Even fate, in their view, was tied to time. If all things unfold from previous causes, then the future is not blank, it is structured. But this did not mean they gave up. It meant they focused their efforts on what could be influenced: intention, preparation, clarity. You don't control the weather, but you can carry the right clothing. You don't choose the moment of crisis, but you can be ready to meet it. They saw time as both teacher and test. It teaches you by passing. It tests you by asking how well you use it. Every wasted hour is a missed chance to become who you aim to be. Every delay in action is time handed over to chance, to fear, or to habit. So they moved with care, but without hesitation. They spoke deliberately, but without silence when truth was needed. This relationship with time also shaped how they dealt with others. They knew that everyone is living in a time that cannot be reversed, that people are shaped by moments you did not see, that their time is just as limited as yours. This created not just urgency, but compassion. Forgiveness comes more easily when you know that everyone is trying to use what little time they have to find peace. Modern people often feel overwhelmed by time. Too much to do, not enough time to do it. But the Stoics offer a correction. They say, start with now, not tomorrow, not someday, not later. What is needed now? What is true now? What can be done right now with what you have? That is where power lives. Even in grief, they return to time. When someone they loved died, they didn't say, I lost them. They said, I had them for a time. This small shift in language carries enormous peace. It reminds us that all is borrowed, that nothing is promised, that every relationship, every experience is part of a flow we cannot stop but can cherish. This thinking is not just spiritual, it has practical effects. It reduces procrastination. It clarifies priorities. It strengthens discipline. It makes it easier to say no and more meaningful to say yes. When time is seen as the field in which character is tested, you stop wasting it. And when you stop wasting it, life becomes richer, not longer, but fuller. As the day closes and the minutes slow, let this be the reminder. Time is not the enemy. It is not a race. It is not slipping through your fingers. It is the canvas. It is the space where you build who you are. It does not ask for perfection. Only presence, only attention, and only the courage to meet each passing moment with the grace of someone who knows this is all there is, and that is enough. Recognizing the value of the present moment changes the way we move through the world. When time is seen as a gift rather than a guarantee, even the smallest actions gain weight. Life becomes less about urgency and more about intention. And from this deeper awareness, another Stoic principle rises, one that holds all others together. To live well is to live in harmony with nature, not in poetic abstraction, but in grounded physical truth. Nature, to the Stoics, was not a backdrop. It was law. This concept, often repeated in Stoic texts, carried meaning far beyond personal alignment. Living according to nature meant living in agreement with the universe's rational order. But it also meant recognizing that humans are not separate from the natural world. We are an expression of it. To understand the Stoic view fully, one must go beyond the moral and logical and into the ecological. Their philosophy anticipated what we now call environmental ethics, not in modern terms, but in ancient principles. The Stoics believed that everything in the cosmos is connected by logos, the divine reason that structures reality. This reason is not confined to human thought. It flows through trees, oceans, stars, animals, seasons. Each thing, no matter how small, plays a role in the great living whole. To interfere with this balance selfishly or carelessly was not only foolish, it was irrational. This belief created a kind of early ecological humility. The Stoics did not view nature as a resource to be used without limit. They viewed it as a system to be understood and respected. When they said that virtue is living according to nature, they meant living in tune with what the universe demands of us as rational beings within a larger shared system. The wise person, therefore, did not act in ways that destroyed the environment or disrupted natural cycles. They saw their place as caretakers, not owners. They taught that excess, whether in consumption, ambition, or exploitation, leads to disorder, and disorder breaks the harmony of nature. Seneca, for instance, warned about greed not just because it harmed the soul, but because it disrespected the natural limits of the world. He believed that simple living, moderation, and gratitude were not only morally sound, but environmentally aligned. The Stoic commitment to frugality was not just about personal virtue, it mirrored nature's own efficiency. Nothing in nature wastes. The rain falls where it's needed. The tree sheds what it cannot carry. The river follows its course without force. Observing these patterns, Stoics drew lessons on how to live, not through domination, but through participation. They also believed that nature provides us with everything necessary for a good life, that most suffering comes from ignoring this truth and chasing things beyond what is natural. A person who tries to own more than they need, who pollutes for short-term gain, who extracts without giving back, is not living according to reason. They are, in Stoic terms, sick in soul. Even their concept of justice extended to the non-human world. While they did not write of animal rights or climate policy, their principles suggest a form of moral consideration that includes all forms of life. If justice is giving each thing its due, then trees, animals, air, and water deserve care, not because they serve us, but because they belong to the same whole. Nature is not property, it is kin. This way of thinking has deep implications for how we treat the earth today. Modern crises, from deforestation to pollution to climate change, are often framed as technical problems. The Stoics would see them as moral failures, failures of restraint, of awareness, of gratitude. When humanity acts without regard for natural law, it is not just damaging the planet, it is acting against itself. To them, environmental neglect is not a side issue. It is a reflection of disordered values. If someone cannot limit their desires, if they cannot see beyond their momentary gain, they are not truly free. And if a society encourages that behavior, it is heading away from wisdom, not toward it. True civilization is not measured by wealth or speed. It is measured by how well it fits within the greater order. The Stoics' attention to natural rhythms also shaped how they thought about cycles, birth and death, growth and decay, seasons of abundance and scarcity. They did not seek to escape these patterns. They sought to understand and honor them. A leaf falls not because it is wrong, but because it is time. A drought does not mean nature has failed, but that its balance is shifting. This respect for impermanence kept them grounded and reminded them that human control is limited. Their approach invites reflection on what we consider progress. Is it progress to conquer nature or to cooperate with it? Is growth always good, or only when it aligns with health and harmony? The Stoics would argue that true growth is internal, measured by wisdom, not by expansion. When expansion harms the natural order, it is regression, not development. They also saw natural disasters as part of the world's rhythm. Earthquakes, floods, plagues. These were not punishments or signs of cosmic anger. They were simply events within a complex, interconnected whole. The Stoic response was not to curse the sky, but to ask, what does this moment require of me? How can I act wisely, even now? This response teaches resilience. It shifts the question from, why did this happen, to, how shall I meet this? The Stoic in a storm does not waste time demanding fairness. They gather themselves, look at what remains, and begin again, closer to nature than before, not further from it. Modern environmentalism often draws on science, data, and policy. These are essential, but without a moral frame, they struggle to reach the heart. Stoicism offers that frame. It says, this planet is not separate from you. You are its voice. Its choices are your choices. And if you harm it, you harm the very system that sustains you. Living according to nature today means more than walking in forests or recycling. It means realigning priorities. It means choosing less when more causes harm. It means asking whether convenience is worth the cost to systems that took millions of years to build. It means seeing the long term, even when profit rewards the short term. The Stoic path is not sentimental. It does not romanticize the natural world, but it honors its order. It respects its strength, and it believes that the best life is one that fits within that structure, not by shrinking, but by rising with it. Let this be the lesson carried forward. Nature is not against us. It is us. When we align with it, we find balance. When we ignore it, we lose direction. The Stoics knew this, and their reminder is simple but urgent. Live according to nature, not because it's fashionable, but because it's the only way to live wisely and lastingly as part of the whole. Harmony with nature was never just about the trees, the weather, or the soil. It included the human body. The Stoics saw no separation between the physical and the rational. They believed that just as the universe follows order and balance, so too should the body be shaped by care, clarity, and discipline. The body, after all, is the vessel through which we experience the world and act in it. It deserves respect, not because of its beauty or strength, but because of its function and fragility. While Stoicism is often seen as a philosophy of the mind, its teachings on physical discipline are clear and consistent. The body was not to be worshipped or neglected. It was to be trained, controlled, used with purpose. The body could be an ally in the pursuit of virtue or a distraction from it, depending on how it was treated. The Stoics believed that pain, fatigue, hunger, cold, and illness were not to be feared. These were simply natural conditions that tested one's response. Endurance was not about showing off. It was about preparing for unpredictability. Life brings physical hardship whether we seek it or not. The person who has trained to meet it calmly suffers less when it arrives. This is why Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort. Seneca wrote of fasting not to lose weight, but to remind himself that he could live with less. He sometimes wore rough clothes or went without comfort so that he would not become dependent on luxury. This was not about asceticism or punishment. It was about flexibility. If you can endure simplicity willingly, then if it is forced upon you, you are not broken. You are ready. Cold exposure served a similar purpose. The Stoics exposed themselves to discomfort so that they could face real difficulty with composure. They didn't seek harm, but they knew that soft living dulls the mind. When you step into the cold voluntarily, you remind yourself that your body is not fragile, that your limits are wider than you thought. This mental resilience, built through physical challenge, reinforces confidence and calm. These practices echo through modern movements like biohacking, cold therapy, intermittent fasting, and strength training, not as fashion, but as forms of self-discipline. The difference is intention. Where some modern approaches aim for optimization or performance, the Stoics aimed for readiness and inner strength. Their physical habits were never ends in themselves. They were tools for building the kind of person who could face pain, loss, and hardship without losing balance. They believed the body was to be strengthened so that it could serve reason better. A tired, unhealthy body makes thinking difficult. A sluggish routine clouds judgment. So the Stoics advised regular movement, moderation in food and drink, and simple habits that kept the body sharp. Not perfect, but functional. Their goal was not to impress others, but to prepare for life. Cleanthes, one of the early Stoics, earned his living by carrying water and working with his hands. He used labor as exercise and believed in the dignity of effort. For him, physical work was not lowly. It was grounding. It built stamina, structure, and gratitude. It kept the mind from drifting into fantasy or indulgence. Musonius Rufus taught that women too should train their bodies, not for beauty, but for strength. He believed that physical capability was a form of freedom, that a person who could walk far, withstand weather, and live with fewer needs was more prepared for a just life. He spoke of exercise as moral development, not vanity. The Stoics also warned against indulgence, overeating, laziness, excessive comfort. These were seen as weaknesses that slowly dull the edge of character. A person who always chooses ease will not act with courage when ease is taken away. They become slaves to preference. But the one who can sleep on the floor and rise early, eat simply, and push the body when needed, this person is free. They never suggested ignoring the body. They saw illness as part of life, and they advised caring for health sensibly. But they drew a line between care and obsession. To be consumed by one's appearance, to chase endless wellness fads, to fear every wrinkle or ache, this was seen as distraction. It was not health, but vanity hiding as discipline. Even pain was reframed. Pain is not the enemy, they said. It is a signal, a teacher. When it comes, notice it, understand it, then choose how to respond. Epictetus, who lived with a limp from youth, reminded his students that pain does not damage the will unless you allow it to. Your body may break, your clarity does not have to. This belief had practical outcomes. Stoics faced injury, sickness, and even torture with unusual calm, not because they were immune to pain, but because they had trained their minds to accept the limits of control. The body suffers, the mind observes, the will remains. And yet they were not emotionless. They felt, they bled, they cried, but they did not panic. They did not lose the ability to act wisely just because they were uncomfortable. That was the goal, not stoic in expression, but stoic in decision. To choose with reason even when the body resists. This connection between the physical and the rational helps explain why Stoic practices remain relevant. In moments of anxiety, deep breathing calms the system. In days of sadness, movement lifts the weight. In times of stress, fasting or silence resets attention. The body, trained with respect and balance, becomes a partner in stability. Modern science supports much of this. Cold exposure increases resilience. Fasting sharpens focus. Regular movement boosts clarity. But the Stoics knew it intuitively. They listened to their bodies without being ruled by them. They made space for effort, not to punish, but to protect what mattered most, the ability to think clearly and act justly. They also understood recovery. Discipline included rest. Sleep was respected, not ignored. Balance was not constant strain, but consistent effort. The wise person, they believed, knew when to push and when to pause. They paid attention not just to how they felt, but to what their purpose required. Today, when health is often tied to appearance or performance, Stoic wisdom offers a different path. Care for the body, not to impress, but to endure. Challenge it, not to conquer, but to cooperate. Use it, not for ego, but for action. Let that guide you in the quiet hours. The body you carry is not a burden. It is not a project. It is a partner. Treat it with purpose. Strengthen it with intention. And when discomfort comes, face it not with fear, but with readiness. Because a mind at peace and a body prepared form a unity that can carry you through anything, rooted, resilient, and free. A body prepared for discomfort supports a mind that resists panic. It holds firm when storms arise, allowing reason to guide behavior rather than emotion. But this resilience, this deep seriousness of Stoic practice, often creates a mistaken impression that Stoicism is grim, lifeless, or cold, that to live with discipline is to live without joy. In truth, the early Stoics understood something that often goes unnoticed, that laughter, irony, and a sharp sense of humor are tools of survival and clarity, not distractions, but enhancements of wisdom. Their humor was not loud or flashy. It was dry, purposeful, and always tied to truth. The Stoics didn't laugh to avoid pain. They laughed because they saw through illusion. They used irony to pierce pretense. They pointed out the contradictions in others and in themselves, not to mock, but to remind. It was not cruelty. It was clarity delivered with a smile. Chrysippus, one of the founding minds of the school, was known for his logical rigor, but also for inserting biting humor into his philosophical debates. His arguments sometimes included jokes, unexpected reversals, and absurd conclusions, not to confuse, but to awaken thought. He understood that sometimes reason alone is not enough. Sometimes the quickest way to reveal nonsense is to exaggerate it. Laughter in these moments becomes recognition. Seneca was even more explicit. He wrote with elegance and moral seriousness, but his letters are filled with wit. He could make fun of himself and his surroundings while still offering deep lessons. He once joked about people who decorate their walls with expensive art, but fill their minds with trash. The irony is sharp, but it is not angry. It invites the reader to laugh, then to reflect. Even Epictetus, often quoted for his firm teachings, knew how to disarm students with humor. In his discourses, he compares people who complain about fate to actors who show up at the wrong moment and then demand a different role. His tone is playful but pointed. He doesn't just lecture, he engages. He invites people to see the absurdity of their own assumptions and, in that moment of recognition, to change. This style was intentional. The Stoics saw irony as a way to loosen attachments. When you can laugh at yourself, you are less controlled by pride. When you can see the ridiculous side of ambition, status, or vanity, their power weakens. Irony opens a gap between stimulus and response, a space where wisdom can enter. Their humor also served as protection. Life was filled with absurdities, corrupt officials, false prophets, dramatic egos, unpredictable weather, sudden illness. If you meet every absurdity with frustration, you lose balance. But if you meet it with a raised eyebrow and a steady response, you remain centered. The Stoics chose the second path. They did not expect the world to make sense on the surface, but they trusted that a deeper logic remained, and humor helped them keep perspective. They did not treat humor as escape. They used it as a weapon against self-deception. When someone claimed to be wise yet chased applause, a Stoic might point out the contradiction, not with anger, but with a question laced in irony. So you wish to be admired by people you believe are foolish. The laugh is immediate, but so is the shift in understanding. Their use of humor also reflects their psychological insight. They knew that shame and fear thrive in silence, that people hide their flaws and become defensive when exposed too directly. But when criticism is wrapped in humor, it softens the blow. It makes reflection possible. A joke can say what a lecture cannot. It opens minds rather than closing them. Even in their metaphors, Stoics leaned into irony. They compared the mind to a garden needing constant care, the passions to wild dogs, the ego to a drunken guest at a party. These images stick. They make complex ideas memorable. They invite the listener not just to understand, but to see and feel. This is why Stoicism, despite its serious themes, was never heavy-handed. It carried weight, but also lightness. It didn't demand perfection. It invited effort, laced with reminders that everyone fails and that failing isn't tragic. It's human. That you can fall, then laugh at how you tripped, then stand up straighter. Modern readers often miss this. They focus on the quotes that sound stern, the teachings that demand control, and assume the Stoics were stone-faced. But a closer look shows a more human philosophy, one that used laughter as an ally in the pursuit of truth. Today, this part of Stoicism matters more than ever. In a world that often takes itself too seriously, where disagreement quickly turns to offense, where pride hides behind every screen, the ability to laugh at yourself is a sign of strength. Irony becomes a form of emotional agility. Humor becomes a doorway to humility. The Stoic practice of journaling often included not just confession, but lightness. I failed today. one might write, but at least I didn't yell at the dog this time. The laughter doesn't erase the effort, it supports it. It gives permission to keep going without the weight of guilt. It replaces shame with responsibility and effort without ego. And when facing external absurdities, traffic, bureaucracy, public drama, the Stoic smile remains, not out of indifference, but out of understanding. If you can't change something, you can still change how you respond. And if the situation is absurd, sometimes the best response is simply to notice the absurdity and choose reason anyway. This does not mean laughing at everything. It means knowing when a heavy heart would break under its own seriousness and when a well-timed grin can carry it through. The Stoics practiced this not for show, but for survival, for sanity, for balance. As you reflect now, consider what role laughter plays in your life. Is it a mask or a mirror? Is it an escape or a return? When did you last smile at your own stubbornness? When did irony help you let go of a mistake instead of defending it? Let Stoicism be more than grit. Let it be full. Let it contain silence, strength, failure, and also the lightness that says, I see what this is. I see myself in it. And I can move forward with steadiness, with self-awareness, and maybe even with a quiet smile. In this, the Stoics remain deeply modern, not just in their thought, but in their tone. And their humor, still dry after all these centuries, carries the same wisdom. Take life seriously enough to laugh at it, and take yourself just lightly enough to grow. To recognize the place of humor in Stoicism is to understand that wisdom is not always heavy. It can laugh at itself, uncover truth with wit, and correct error without shame. But before the Stoics ever developed this balance between reason and irony, clarity and humility, there was another voice that shaped the foundation of all their thought. A man who did not call himself a Stoic, who never wrote a word of philosophy, but whose trial and death would echo into a movement centuries later. Socrates. Though separated by generations, the Stoic school owed its origin to this single figure. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, began his journey not with formulas or doctrines, but with a book about Socrates. After surviving a shipwreck and wandering into a bookstore in Athens, he stumbled upon Xenophon's Memorabilia, a collection of Socratic dialogues. What he read there changed the course of his life. From the pages of a conversation long past, Zeno discovered a model of thought, character, and conviction that would shape everything he would later teach. To understand this influence, one must return to the trial of Socrates, not just as a legal event, but as a turning point in the history of philosophy. In 309 BCE, Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth and impiety. These charges were vague, but the underlying fear was clear. Socrates challenged the powerful. He questioned the wise. He exposed contradictions. And he did so publicly, not with anger, but with a quiet method that revealed what many wished to hide. At his trial, Socrates refused to flatter the jury. He did not plead for his life. He offered no apology in the modern sense. He simply explained his actions, asked questions, and reminded his accusers that fear of death is not wisdom. Death, he said, is either a deep sleep or a transition to another place. Neither is worth fearing. What is worth fearing, he insisted, is injustice, a life lived wrongly, a soul corrupted by falsehood. This response, delivered with calm and integrity, stunned those who heard it. Even when sentenced to death, Socrates remained steady. His choice to drink hemlock rather than flee or compromise left a permanent mark. not because of its drama, but because of its consistency. He lived by principle. He died by principle. And in doing so, he became a prototype, not just for philosophers, but for anyone trying to live truthfully under pressure. Zeno recognized this. When he began developing his own philosophy decades later, he borrowed not just from the content of Socrates' teachings, but from the shape of his life. The idea that virtue is the only true good, that external things, wealth, pleasure, pain, even death, should not disturb a wise person. These are Socratic ideas. Zeno systematized them. He built a school around them, but the root was already there. Socrates had planted a seed. Zeno cultivated it with logic, ethics, and cosmology. The difference was that Socrates was a questioner. He pulled apart assumptions. He left ideas open-ended. Zeno, by contrast, wanted structure. He gave answers. He built a path. But both agreed. The soul must be trained. The body may fail, the world may misjudge you, but the self, if guided by reason, can remain untouched. The trial also set a tone for how philosophy would relate to power. Socrates did not rebel violently. He submitted to the law. But his defiance was internal. He would not lie. He would not flatter. He chose to die rather than betray his beliefs. The Stoics inherited this posture. They taught obedience to law when just and resistance when required by conscience. Like Socrates, they believed that what matters most is not outcome, but fidelity to reason. Cato the Younger, centuries later, would channel this exact spirit. So would countless others who saw in Socratic courage a model for civil strength. Even the Stoic understanding of public service, of engaging with the state not for gain but from duty, reflects Socrates' example. He did not seek office, but he engaged his fellow citizens. He saw philosophy not as escape, but as responsibility. The Stoic concept of indifference to externals also echoes Socratic detachment. Socrates walked barefoot through Athens. He was poor, yet spoke with authority. He had no title, but his presence demanded attention. He saw that the pursuit of money, fame, or pleasure often distracted from the pursuit of self-knowledge. He taught that the examined life is the only life worth living. This line, repeated for generations, became a cornerstone of Stoic practice. Zeno refined it into daily discipline. He created categories of value: preferred, dispreferred, and indifferent. But the principle was the same. Character matters more than condition. Socrates lived this truth with no safety net. The Stoics turned it into a philosophy anyone could practice, whether emperor or slave. Even their method of dialogue, their use of questions, came from Socratic technique. Socrates never lectured. He asked. He teased out contradictions. He forced people to think, not with force, but with persistent logic. Stoic teachers adopted this style. They wanted students to find clarity through effort, not memorization. There is also a deeper emotional link. Socrates was not without feeling. He had friends, students, moments of playfulness and seriousness, but he held emotion in balance. When death approached, he spoke gently to those around him. He comforted them. He reminded them that his death was not a tragedy, but a completion. The Stoics took this image seriously. They believed that death is not to be feared if life has been lived well. Socrates' final moments were not about resignation. They were about alignment. His words and actions matched. His beliefs held steady. He joked with the jailer, took the cup calmly, and asked that a rooster be offered to the god of healing. Even his last words carried layers of meaning, that perhaps death itself is a cure. This kind of irony, this calm defiance wrapped in humility, is pure Stoicism in spirit. Long before the school had a name, it had a model. A man who lived simply, spoke clearly, and died without regret. Zeno, when he stumbled upon that story in the bookstore, did not see entertainment. He saw a blueprint. From that seed came a school of thought that would shape rulers and rebels, that would survive exile, plague, and persecution. But it all began with one trial, one death, one choice to remain firm when the crowd demanded surrender. So, as we reflect now, we return not just to Zeno's system, but to Socrates' silence after the sentence, to his voice steady and sure, asking questions that made people uncomfortable and free. This is where Stoicism began, not in formulas, but in courage, not in texts, but in the life of a man who chose truth over safety, and left behind not a legacy of power, but a path for those willing to think deeply and live without fear. From Socrates' final breath emerged more than just inspiration. It became a generational spark. The courage he showed in the face of death modeled a life where values stood taller than fear, and where truth was passed not just in speech, but in silence. It was this transmission of strength through example that seeded what Zeno would later shape into a full philosophy. And just as Socrates' final lesson was delivered not in a classroom, but in the way he lived and died, so too did the Stoics come to see that the most important teachings are often not spoken, but absorbed, especially in the earliest years of life. To raise a human being is to sculpt a future citizen of the world, and the Stoics did not leave this part of life to chance. They believed that philosophy was not something one discovered in adulthood after years of error. It was something that should begin in childhood, not through complex theory, but through shaping character, forming habits, and building the inner architecture that could carry a person through joy, pain, praise, and rejection with the same steady strength. Children, they taught, are not born wise, but born capable. Capable of learning reason, of practicing virtue, of growing into a person who can think clearly and act justly. But that development is not automatic. It must be cultivated with care, and it begins not with punishment or control, but with example. The Stoics saw parents and teachers as moral guides. Their task was not to produce obedience, but understanding. They believed that the root of good behavior is not fear, but insight. A child who knows why a choice is right is far more likely to repeat it than one who simply fears the consequences of doing wrong. So they urged caregivers to model calm, to act with consistency, and to show through daily life what it means to live with principle. Discipline in Stoic thought was essential, but it was not domination. It was structure, a way of teaching that choices have consequences, that the world is not always soft, and that hardship is not cruelty but training. A child who learns to delay gratification, who learns to hear no without breaking down, who sees failure as part of the process rather than a threat to self-worth, is a child being shaped for freedom. They did not expect perfection. They expected progress. They saw mistakes as opportunities. A child who lies is not lost. They are learning the tension between fear and truth. A child who lashes out is not broken. They are exploring the boundary between feeling and control. In these moments, the adult's role is not simply to correct, but to guide. to ask, to listen, and to redirect with reason rather than rage. Autonomy was also central to their method. The Stoics believed that even young people should be given chances to decide, to choose, and to reflect. Not total freedom, but space. Space to fail and recover. Space to think and speak. Because only through practice can a child learn to trust their judgment and adjust it when needed. They advised teaching through stories, through shared challenges, through direct engagement with nature and labor. A child who worked with their hands, who saw the seasons change, who observed cause and effect, not just in books but in daily life, was more grounded than one protected from all discomfort. Comfort, they warned, can make the young weak. Exposure to manageable difficulty builds resilience. Musonius Rufus, one of the most respected Stoic teachers, spoke openly about education. He believed that virtue was not gendered. Boys and girls both should be taught courage, justice, and wisdom. He rejected the idea that some minds were born for philosophy and others not. All minds could grow if given the right soil. He also emphasized simplicity. Too much luxury at a young age, he said, blunts gratitude. When a child receives everything, they learn to expect. When they are denied nothing, they learn to crave. But when they live with enough, but not excess, they learn appreciation. And appreciation opens the door to humility. The Stoics saw no conflict between love and firmness. To love a child was not to shield them from truth, but to prepare them for it. To explain loss rather than hide it. To name sadness rather than pretend it doesn't exist. They believed children could handle truth, especially when spoken with warmth and care. They also warned against praise that feeds ego. Applauding a child endlessly for things they did not choose, appearance, talent, or outcomes, can turn praise into poison. Better to praise effort, patience, honesty, traits that can be chosen and cultivated. This creates a self-image tied to action, not accident. This approach has clear links to modern insights in psychology. Studies show that children praised for effort develop more grit than those praised for intelligence. That emotional regulation begins with co-regulation, a calm adult helping a child name their storm. The Stoics, without neuroscience, already practiced these truths. They also believed that character mattered more than knowledge. A child who could quote philosophy but treat others with cruelty was not truly educated. Education, for the Stoics, meant forming a whole person, one who could stand up for others, take responsibility, and remain calm when challenged. Play, in their view, was not meaningless. It was practice. A child pretending to be a leader, a doctor, a judge. They were rehearsing future selves. So adults were encouraged to observe play, to enter it wisely, to offer small corrections when the child's choices revealed confusion or cruelty. This does not mean turning every moment into a lesson. It means being present, knowing that the child is always learning, from tone, from posture, from how adults speak to one another. Philosophy is not taught. It is shown. A parent who says, "Be kind," but then speaks sharply to a server teaches contradiction. A teacher who says, "Control your emotions," but erupts in frustration models instability. To teach a child Stoicism is to become a student of your own behavior, because they are watching, they are absorbing, and what they absorb will shape not just how they act, but how they think and see the world. They must learn to accept when things go wrong, to recover from embarrassment, to forgive themselves. These are not easy lessons, but they begin in small moments. when a toy breaks, when a game is lost, when a promise is delayed. The adult who sits with the child and says, "This hurts and it will pass," gives a gift that lasts a lifetime. The Stoics also saw the value of mentorship. Older children were encouraged to teach younger ones, not as authority, but as guides, explaining ideas, helping others, reflecting on choices. These roles gave the child not just knowledge, but meaning. And meaning, when discovered early, creates direction. In a world that now races to fill every hour with achievement, the Stoics would advise slowing down. Let the child walk, let them fall, let them ask, let them wait. Growth cannot be rushed. Character cannot be taught in speed. It forms quietly, in rhythm, through repetition and relationship. So, as you consider the next generation, not just as students, but as future thinkers, builders and caregivers, remember what the Stoics knew. The path to a rational, kind and stable adulthood begins early. Not in lectures, but in the way we live near our children. Their character is shaped not by pressure, but by presence, not by control, but by clarity, not by fear, but by steady, compassionate truth. You've just journeyed through over 2,000 years of Stoic wisdom, through the quiet resolve of forgotten women, the radical visions of Zeno, the strength of soldiers and slaves, the logic of Chrysippus, and the steady hands of emperors and children alike. You've seen Stoicism not as a cold wall of discipline, but as a living, breathing guide, a philosophy of fire shaped by loss, sharpened by irony, softened by nature, and grounded in the relentless now. From the battlefield to the nursery, from ancient marketplaces to modern offices, the Stoic voice continues. Live according to nature, master only what is yours, face death with dignity, carry your body like a servant, your thoughts like a flame. It is not a rule book, it is not a slogan, it is a practice, a way to stand still when the world turns sideways, a way to breathe, act, and rest without fear. So as you drift into sleep tonight, let that final whisper settle into your thoughts. You are not in control of the storm, but you are in command of your ship. You are not a product of what happens, you are a response to it. And with that, you are already walking the path. If this journey spoke to you, leave a comment below. What part of Stoicism do you want to carry into your own life tomorrow? Let's learn from each other, quietly, steadily, together. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to uncover, and this is just the beginning. Tap that bell so wisdom keeps finding you, even when the world tries to pull you away from it. Now rest well, you've earned it.